IB Nation, welcome back to another episode, another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Wednesday, February 8th. We're now 8 days away from my wife and nephew's birthdays, Ryan, so I got to start getting going on some planning and some shopping here real quick. But today, we're going to kind of do things a little bit different, Ryan, and we're going to kind of somewhat introduce sort of a new format for our Wednesday shows moving forward. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of make them be a little bit like our midweek mailbag, which I have at Irish Breakdown. We're going to take, 3 or 4 different topics, sometimes maybe only 2 or 3, depending on how busy or not busy it is. We'll take a Notre Dame team topic or 2. We'll take a recruiting topic or 2. And then we'll take, sometimes we'll take a college football topic as well and just kind of talk about each one. So instead of like an hour-long show on a topic, we'll just kind of break it down into, some 15, 20-minute long segments. And then we'll have a mailbag at the end. And so that's what we're going to do today, Ryan. We're going to talk a little recruiting. And then also a little, a little bit about some NFL draft stuff regarding Notre Dame players, and we'll start there. But just a reminder that we will be doing a mailbag, so throw your mailbag questions in there. Super chats will obviously be put at the top of the list. And today, Ryan, we're going to talk, as we said, we're going to talk about some of the new recruiting-wise. We'll talk about some of the new offers that have gone out. We'll talk about guys that are setting up visits already. Right now, Notre Dame and the rest of college football is in a bit of I don't know if it's a dead period or quiet period, but right now guys can't be on campus.
It's a dead period right now.
Right.
Yep.
So that's why you're not seeing a whole lot of information coming out and a whole lot of contact, but kids are starting to set up visits when those ramp back up. Notre Dame is getting obviously closer and closer to spring ball when our workouts are rocking and rolling. So have information and stuff on that as we get it. And then Friday, we're actually going to get a chance to meet with Sam Hartman, Javante Jean-Baptiste, Thomas Harper, and Caleb Smith when they make the transfers available to the media. So that'll be fun. So our Friday show is going to actually be pushed back a little bit because I'll be at that meeting with those guys. So our mailbag on Friday will be pushed back a little bit. But, so I have a lot of this stuff. So I think this will be a fun format, Ryan, on Wednesdays, and just kind of taking a little bit, just some quick hitters. It's one of the things that we're looking at doing. There's a few other things that we're going to be adding to the CFB Nation channel and the Irish Breakdown channel. Before we begin, I want to apologize for the lack of light on this end. I am dealing with a little bit of a lot of a migraine headache today. So the light was just really blowing me up. So I apologize about that, but it's not going to change the topics today and the discussion. It's just a little less aesthetically pleasing, I think, for you. Ryan, I want to begin some NFL draft news related to Notre Dame, and that is that the NFL released the 319 players that were invited to the NFL Scouting Combine. Now, this is kind of a big deal because I thought I saw on Twitter today that last year only 32 of the players that were drafted, which is basically an early round. It's not even a full later round because with all the compensation picks, only 32 players got picked last year that weren't at the Combine. Yep. So now I think the tweet also said, I'd have to see who it was from. This isn't information that I gathered or research I did. It's a tweet I saw from a reputable NFL source. There was something like 80 or 90 different guys that were drafted that didn't get invited to the Combine. That were at the Combine that didn't get drafted, excuse me.
Sure.
But there was only 32 guys that didn't get invited. So there were 4 Notre Dame players invited, Ryan. What I'm going to do is I'm going to list those players, and we'll kind of go through each guy and just kind of what awaits them, what at the Combine. Then we'll talk about a couple of the guys that weren't invited. One was not overly surprising, and one was for me anyway. And so we'll dive into that a little bit as well. So, Ryan, 4 players that were invited to the Combine for Notre Dame. These were not surprises. Was obviously Michael Mayer and Isaiah Foskey. Tight end Michael Mayer, defensive end edge Isaiah Foskey, offensive lineman Jarrett Patterson, and safety Brandon Joseph. So Notre Dame will have 4 guys. It's a smaller group for 2 reasons. One is there was a couple guys I thought might get Combine invites that didn't, especially one in the secondary. And number 2, Notre Dame doesn't lose a lot of players from last year's team, especially offensively. So you're not going to have a lot of guys in the draft when a lot of guys are coming back. Cam Hart decided to come back. Obviously, Notre Dame started 8 sophomores in the bowl, true sophomores in the bowl game. So not a lot of those guys are eligible to come out. A lot of the veteran players, Braden Lindsey's not coming back. He chose not to participate, and he's not going to pursue a professional football career. But other than that, all the running backs come back. All the other receivers come back that played this year. and obviously defensively, a lot of guys come back. Cam Hart decided to come back. So Notre Dame's in a situation where a lot of the guys that might have been here are back. So let's focus, however, on the guys that will be, and we'll I want to hear from you in regard to why this combine process matters for them. And we'll begin with Michael Mayer, who right now is projected I think a consensus from what I've seen, first round pick. But what can the combine mean for Michael Mayer, Ryan?
Well, I think it's time to dispel some stereotypes that have kind of been parlayed upon a guy like a Michael Mayer. There's an assumption out there that he is not athletic. That's kind of what that's what has been thrown out there. That's why you're seeing guys like Luke Musgrave get mocked in the first round at this point from reputable people, right? Like the guys like Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks and those guys, like they have legitimate NFL sources. So they're getting fed this information, right? So you're seeing Luke Musgrave, you're seeing Dalton Kincaid, you're seeing Michael Mayer consistently. But for some of those guys, I mean, he's the second or third tight end drafted. And I think that is because Michael Mayer is being stereotyped as this low ceiling tight end, high floor for sure, that doesn't bring a massive athletic upside to the table. I, of course, have been very consistent on this show. I disagree with it because I think that there's a different type of athleticism. For one, is Michael Mayer going to go to the combine and run the 4.5s? No, he's not going to do that. But I think he has an opportunity to check some boxes as far as the athleticism. And I think that the athletic testing can be overblown for some players because it's more about just meeting with the teams and just kind of checking the medicals and doing all that type of stuff. Michael Mayer is not going to have any medical issues that we know of, right? Like he is a healthy player relatively throughout the entirety of his Notre Dame career. I believe he's going to check the boxes from the off the field perspective, be able to talk to those scouts and evaluators and general managers and be able to sell himself as a person, as a hard worker, as a player. But the athletic testing is going to be big for him because if he's able to go to Indianapolis and run a good 40, have explosive jumps, be able to change direction well, do the position drills well, I think Michael Mayer has the opportunity to solidify himself for what I think he is, and that's the best tight end in the 2023 draft handedly. Because I think that people want to paint these other players as in the same tier or maybe even a tier above because they might have a higher athletic upside. But again, I think that people just don't quite understand that a 40-yard dash time is not the epitome of athleticism, right? There's different types of athletes. Is Michael Mayer going to win in different ways than a Luke Musgrave, for instance? Sure is. Is he going to win different ways than a Kyle Pitts? Sure is. It doesn't make it, though. There's not one way to win. There's not one way to be successful. I think Michael Mayer, though, can go to Indianapolis and showcase that, yeah, I might not be the 4-5 athlete at tight end, but I am plenty athletic enough to be a darn good football player at the next level. That's what he has an opportunity to do for me.
If you had to predict, Ryan, what isn't what you're hearing, I'm just curious what you would predict. Because last year there was some really strange, like we heard a lot of reports from scouts and people that train. Because basically at this point in time, you really can't. It's getting so hard to trust sources in this type of industry because you're in like, oh no, he's running consistent 4.3s. From Kyle Hamilton, remember that? We're talking to people that were involved in his training, and then he runs out.
Trainers are the worst in that department, man. I mean, even
why?
There was a guy that was working with a bunch of TCU players a few years ago. It was when like Jalen Reagor came out and then the corner that came out, I forget his name, but they were like, he was talking like they're going to run 4.3s. And then Jalen Reagor ran like 4.47. I mean, it's still a good time, but like it's not 4.3. You know what I mean? Like it's not. So yeah, it's I
just don't see that how that helps those players. Cause all it did with Kyle Hamilton was create issues.
Yes.
Right. Because see, what happened was if you'd be like, hey, he's not going to run a great 40 time, but he's going to leap. Because he did all those things very well.
Yep.
But you set this standard for he was going to run this number and then it didn't happen. We heard the same thing about Kyron Williams and, so it's hard to trust sources. I'm just going to ask you, what do you think? Because let's say a couple things. Number one is nobody runs as fast when they're in pads or in a uniform during the season as they do at the combine. These guys are training to run the fastest possible time.
Right.
So combined with what you've seen from Michael Mayer and then the work he's putting in with a trainer, what do you kind of project would be a range that he can run, and what is the kind of the range he needs to make sure he gets into to somewhat dispel those things, not just from a 40 time, but I think also from an explosiveness numbers, the change of direction. I think all those things are, because I would even argue that the 40 time will be important for him, but I would say the shuttle and some of those other change of direction drills could even be more important for Mayer, because that's where a lot of the stuff comes from about he doesn't get out separate, he doesn't get out of breaks as quickly, he doesn't get as much separation. That's as much about the 20-yard, the what is it? They have to do the 60 and the 20, right?
Yep.
The 20-yard shuttle and the 60.
2016 and 3-cone. Yep.
Right. So, now last year a lot of guys didn't run. Was it the 3-cone that a lot of guys bailed out of?
Yes.
Right? Because of the stupid way that the NFL did. Actually, that'll be a question here in a minute too.
Yeah.
So, but what do you kind of predict that he'll run? And then what do you think is the range he has to fall into in order to maybe eliminate some of those questions?
I think the over-under would probably get set at about like 4.73, somewhere in that ballpark, like give or take 100th of a second. I think that for me personally, as long as he's in the 4.7s, like I'm cool, man. Like I don't need to see him run incredibly fast, because I know that's not necessarily how he wins. I don't need to see that. I will say this though, if he runs 4.7 flat or better, it's a really good time, right? If he runs 4.7 flat as big as he is, as well built as he is, I think that would be an incredible time, because I kind of compare him a little bit athletically, Brian, to like we've seen Mark Andrews, a guy that come out that I think wins in similar ways. We've seen Jason Witten. Those guys were high 4.6 type of athletes. Like they were like 4.69, 4.68. If Michael Mayer runs something in that ballpark, I think you just check your box and you keep moving. I mean, to your point though, like I want to see a good 20-yard shuttle. I want to see a good broad jump. Like that's the one that I really want to see. If Michael Mayer doesn't jump that high in the vertical, I don't really care that much, man, because he's got that big body, big frame. He can box out. The broad jump, though, for me, and people ask this question all the time, what test really parlays to NFL success the most across the board? For me, it's the broad jump. That one is because that shows lower body explosiveness and the just to pop out through the hips. So I want to see him do well in that drill. I want to see him do well in the change of direction stuff. And I just want him to check a box in the 40 time. If he runs the 4.7s, I'll be fine with it. If he runs 4.78 though, a lot of people's narratives are not going to change at all. So if he runs anything 4.7 flat or better, it's a fantastic time for him. It really would be.
Well,
I'm also interested to see what he comes in at, because he played 265.
Right.
I imagine he'll be more in the 255-ish range when he gets to Indianapolis, but that's just kind of my speculation on it.
TJ Hawkinson, I think, was the last tight end to go in the top 10, I believe.
Yes.
And he ran a 4.7 flat.
Yeah.
But here's the thing I was going to point out to your point about the change of direction. He ran a 4.18 shuttle, which is really good for a 250. And he did that at 251.
Yeah.
So if Mayer can be around a 4.2 shuttle in the low 4.7s, 40, I think those would be good times. They're not going to blow you away times. So I think those are more about, okay, I can trust the film a little bit more now than I would if he comes out and runs a 4.78 or something like that, right? I think that's the question mark that people have.
Yeah.
Isaiah Foskey, Ryan, what does he need to show at the combine? Because he had a solid week at the Senior Bowl. Did some good things and some not so good things. Confirmed some of the things we've talked about, and that he doesn't really have a secondary move.
Yes.
But what does he need to do at the combine to kind of get himself back into that, maybe that day one, early day two conversation?
Yeah, I think that for me, Foskey needs to blow the place up as far as the explosiveness stuff, right? It would be great if Isaiah Foskey went to the combine and ran a 3-cone and he ran a really nice time. Like that would be fantastic. I don't necessarily expect that though, because one, I don't think that he'll run a 3-cone just in general based upon what we've seen in recent years, because I think Isaiah Foskey and the trainers are going to be focused on the 40 time, the broad jump, the vertical jump. Those things are all similar because they're all linear explosive things, right? So let's focus on that. And then when we get to the pro day, for the next few weeks before the pro day, you're going to be doing nothing but the change of direction stuff, right? So I don't expect him to do any of that change of direction stuff at the combine. But what I expect him to do, because how does Isaiah Foskey win, Brian? Like these athletic tests are always, for me, a verification. Because when I watch Isaiah Foskey play, I say, you are incredibly long and you are a very explosive football player. So what parlays to showing off that explosiveness? A good 40 time, mostly a 10-yard split though. That's what I'm more worried about. What's the 10-yard split out of the stance? And then what's the broad jump? What's the vertical jump? I want to see those things because that's how Isaiah Foskey wins. I don't think people should expect Isaiah Foskey to run this blazing 3-cone because I watch him and I'm just like, he's not an outside track winner with bends. Like, that's not really what he wins. But you need to blow the place up in the ways that you win. So 40 time, 10-yard split, and the broad jump and vertical jump. Those things are all linearly explosive testing. And I think Isaiah Foskey needs to do that really well, because that's how he wins at the next level, in my opinion.
But of course, if he does do well in those other testing times, that's only helps him, because then it may make me think as a coach, well, hey, he's got the athleticism in him. Maybe there's some tools that I can work with. There's something that I can work with. Whereas if he doesn't run great times, it's just like, well, that's just who he is athletically. Then you kind of put him in a box.
Yes.
And I think that doesn't necessarily help him, in my opinion.
Everybody lost their minds about Trayvon Walker's 40 time and stuff last year. I will say this. The thing that helped him the most was the 3-cone and the shuttle that he ran. He ran some stupid times for a 275-pound guy. And if you watch him on film, he's a lot like Isaiah in the sense that he is a speed to power converter. You don't see him turning corners a ton, but the Jacksonville Jaguars see him run this crazy 3-cone time where you're like, oh, maybe there's a little more in there than we originally thought. Maybe he's a little more flexible. Maybe he could do a little bit more. So anytime you can show that there might be potential to be more, it's fantastic. But I think the baseline for Foskey is that those explosive tests, you need to do those things well, because that's how you had 26.5 sacks during your career. That's why.
Speaking of Trayvon Walker, he had a 6.89 in the 3-cone shuttle, which is like wide receiver, running back, like Kevin. I think Kevin Austin last year had one of the best 3-cone drills at the combine, and I think he was in the 7.8s. I believe he might have even been low 6.9.
I think he was like 6'6" something, if I remember correctly. Kevin had
6.71.
Now.
Okay, 6.71, and then a 4.15. But I mean, there's been some really good athletes that have been in the 6.8s. That's a really good time. A really good time.
It's an alien number, man. Guys that big aren't supposed to be running those times. Like, it's very uncommon, which is why, again, right or wrong, that's why Trayvon Walker went number 1 overall, because of that perceived athletic upside.
Yeah. Let's go to Jarrett Patterson, Ryan. I mean, look, I think the on-field stuff is going to be obviously something that we'll discuss, but I think the biggest thing for Jarrett Patterson is going to be what happens before he works out. How do the medicals check out? How do the interviews check out? I think of all the guys here, I would argue that he's got the most to gain from what happens before they even start working out at the combine.
No doubt. Medicals are by far the biggest thing for Jarrett Patterson. I expect, and honestly, Brian, you make a great point, because when he sits down in those meetings, people are going to ask him, Jarrett, it seemed like you didn't get a ton better during your last couple of years, right? You kind of leveled off a little bit. What's the reason for that, right? Is it just that fact that you dealt with some durability issues? Was it switching from center to guard your final year? Like, what's the reason for that, right? So I think that conversation matters, but nothing outweighs the medicals for Jarrett Patterson. Because, I mean, again, the NFL still likes Jarrett Patterson. There's a reason that he got invited to the Senior Bowl. He wasn't great during Senior Bowl week, in my opinion. I thought he was very up and down. I thought there was more downs than ups, to be completely transparent, right? But I still think you saw some upside with Jarrett. And there was a reason that he was once thought of as a guy that maybe could be a top 50 type of pick. Like that's the reason that he was there, at least a top 64 type of pick.
Ryan, there's a lot of people mocking him in the first round a year ago. I mean, not a year ago. I mean, before, like after
2 years
last year's draft. No, this past year, because there was one draft. I'm talking about meaning not a year ago, because there weren't mock drafts for this draft a year ago. But after last year's draft, there were mock drafts coming out from reputable people that had 4 Notre Dame kids going in the first round.
Yep.
It was Foskey, Brandon Joseph, Mayer, and then Jarrett Patterson, right? And so he's fallen quite a bit.
He has fallen. And I think that the fall obviously is, he gutted it out. He had an okay season this year, but it wasn't a great season. It wasn't. And it was a tough transition. I get that, but you need to flash the upside that you have that people still think is there. Because I still think that there's upside with Jarrett Patterson. I do. If I was an NFL team that could be patient with Jarrett Patterson, if I was an offensive line coach, I would love to work with the kid, man, because I think that he's going to test well for his position. I think he's going to, every drill that he chooses to do outside of maybe the bench press, he's got shorter arms, so maybe even be a decent bencher, honestly. But I think the movement stuff, he'll look good. I think he'll look good in the positional drills when he's asked to pull out in space and do a lot of type of stuff. I think he'll do fine on the field. But the core of what is important for Jarrett Patterson, is you need to have a clean bill of health, man. And you need to have your body be in a state where guys are like, I'm not worried about him breaking down in 3 years. Because, I mean, offensive line, their bodies take a toll, man. I was just talking to a former offensive lineman at the Division I level that he tried to play USFL ball last year, and his body just broke down. Like, it happens quickly. So I think Jared, not only just check out that you're healthy now, your body also needs to check out that, like, hey, I can take the grueling nature of playing NFL football for the foreseeable future. Can you finish a first contract? That's the things that Jared needs to answer. And I mean, I think you said it perfectly. The things that happen before and after the athletic testing is far more important for Jared Patterson during Indianapolis week.
Last one is Brandon Joseph, Ryan. This is one of the biggest enigmas in the Notre Dame draft for me because, like, I know you love his film from 2020 and been kind of waiting now 2 years to see that film again. I think we saw it twice this year, in my opinion. We saw it against
Ohio State, Syracuse. Yeah.
Bingo.
Yep.
But we didn't see a lot of it.
No.
So he's a very interesting case for me. I think the interviews and all that stuff is going to be important for him, but he needs to get some momentum back, Brian. And I think the best way for him to do that is to rock it at the combine. I don't know if he's going to do it or not. I have no clue, but I think he's probably he's second to me on the guy who has a chance to gain the most momentum back with on-field drills at this event. I would make that case. I think Foskey can help himself for sure. But I don't think Foskey's lost as much momentum as Brandon Joseph has.
No, not close. I mean, the full scope of Brandon Joseph is like all important, man. It's funny, because I mean, he even dealt with some nagging injuries this year a little bit, right? So like, yeah, let's check the medicals real quick, make sure that's all good. But the two biggest thing for him, easy, Brian, is one, if I'm an NFL evaluator, if I'm a scout there in Indianapolis, I want to sit down with Brandon Joseph and they ask point blank questions. And my point blank question would be, Brandon, you look like you were going to be a first round pick after 2020. That's what you looked like. 2021, 2022, you weren't that guy, man. Why weren't you that guy? Tell me why you weren't that guy. I want to know. Why in your one season at Notre Dame did you have two really good games and then you were pretty much disappeared the rest of the season? Those questions need to be asked and they need to be answered. And Brandon, from an interview prep perspective, needs to be honest and he needs to have those answers to those questions. They matter tremendously. So that's a big point. And I think the other thing, Brian, is I was never on I mean, we've talked about his athleticism overall, right? I was always more you would definitely agree with this, is that he's more smooth than he is incredibly athletic, right?
Correct.
Like he's a smooth kid. He's a smooth mover. He's not going to go run a 4.3 though, 4.4.
I don't
like,
think so. No, yeah. I think he's more Kyle Hamilton than he is, a guy that's going to go put up great speed numbers.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, yes, I would say that's very accurate.
And even for me, like I want to see the short area stuff and I want to see what he looks like in the positional drills. Like I want to see how smooth his hips are. I want to see how quickly he can get out of his pedal. Those are things I want to see. The 40 time, like as long as you're 4.5 high, 4.6 flat, like I don't care that much, man. Cause like it just isn't that pertinent to me, right? I care about his change of direction stuff because the best of Brandon Joseph during his career is good eye discipline, and then he's able to get in and out of his breaks quick and able to open up and run. Those are the best things, right? That's where the range comes from. So I don't care about so much that, you run a fast 40, you vertical 42 inches. Like I don't care about that. As long as they're solid numbers and you look good in the positional drills and you change direction well and your hips look smooth, that's a win for me from Brandon Joseph. But more than anything, I really think those interviews are massive for Brandon Joseph. I mean, he's got some questions that he has the answer because he was out in Las Vegas for the East-West Shrine game, Brian. I'll be honest, like I didn't really watch the game much. I didn't watch the week of practice much, but I didn't hear his name at all week. And that's not a great thing for me all the time, like
because buzz matters.
Yes.
Maybe it shouldn't, but buzz matters. I mean, hey, I saw so-and-so. He really looked good. Oh, man, let me check. Let me go back in and dive in the film and look at him. That stuff matters, man. How many times have you and I seen a guy come out of the Senior Bowl just with tons of buzz?
Exactly.
And he just keeps going up and up and up the draft boards. I mean, We've seen it with Notre Dame. I mean, Zach Martin was a guy that was battling to get into the first round. If what I remember correctly, was more probably an early second round guy coming out of Notre Dame. But he dominated the entire week of the Senior Bowl, and the buzz just kept growing and growing and growing. And all of a sudden, bam, number 16 overall pick. Yep. And those things help. I mean, I don't know if maybe Quentin Nelson would have still been a top 10 pick, Ryan, but it didn't hurt that he went to the Senior Bowl and dominated at the Senior Bowl, right? And then now all of a sudden you're talking about the first lineman off the board. So
Sure.
I think that stuff matters. So when you go to an event and you don't stand out, that's gonna like with Foskey, for example.
Yeah.
He had some really bad reps.
Yes.
But he also had some reps you're like, okay, yeah, that's something I can work with, right? And you say as a coach, especially as a position coach, like, look, this guy, I can work with this guy. He's
100%.
big, he's long, he's powerful. He shows me some really flashy plays. I think I can get something out of him. But like the last thing you want to be called at is, Ryan, is you say it, just a guy.
Just a guy.
It's the last thing you want to be labeled as. You'd rather be Foskey than that, where, hey, look, this guy is really raw and he's inconsistent. But man, he's got some tools I can work with.
Yep.
You don't want to just be like another, especially the skill position, because I'll take a shot on a guy here's where the last 2 years of film hurts him, Ryan. If the last 2 years of film would have looked like his 2020 year and he wasn't really a great athlete, then people would say, man, but there's some really good film to work with.
But he's a good football player.
Right.
Exactly.
But if you got 2 years of not great film and then you're not standing out athletically, I'm going to take a flyer on the guy that ran the 4.3.
Right.
Than the guy but if I have a guy that's got great film, this is what helped Alohi Gilman.
Yep.
Alohi Gilman had really good change of direction numbers. He ran a 4.6. He's a 5'10" guy that ran a 4.6 at the combine. He got drafted and he's now playing a bunch in the NFL. Why? Because the film was phenomenal.
It was very good.
Right?
Yep.
And he got his role on special teams. He was on every special teams. And then that has built into a role where, let's be real, Alohi was drafted to be a special teams guy.
100%.
And he has become a part of their defensive back rotation because he's just a really good football player. Yep. Unfortunately, Brandon doesn't really have that. He didn't play a ton of special teams for Notre Dame this year. He was banged up a lot. There's just not that level of film that you look at and say, boy, this guy's got some great film. You have to go all the way back to the COVID year. And I would be willing to bet you there's a lot of scouts, or at least some scouts and decision makers who are going to be like me that look at film from 2020 with an asterisk.
Oh, no, that 100% happens. I've had people ask me about, and this was a conversation with the Derek Stingley stuff last year, was people kept looking back to 2019. And I'm like, yeah, man, 2019 still happened, but it doesn't matter anymore, right? Mm-hmm. Who you are this year mattered. What happened last year matters more than what you did 3 years ago at this point. That doesn't matter as much. So, yeah, NFL scouts are going to take much more. They're going to care much more about what did 2021 look like? What did 2022 look like? And the worst part about it for Brandon Joseph is, again, the fact that I didn't hear much about him during East-West Shrine Week, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Because you could hear negative things too, right, about that type of stuff. But the thing that Brandon Joseph did really well throughout his career, even though it was madly inconsistent, is that he forced a lot of turnovers, man. He had 10 interceptions during his 3-year career, right? So if you're not making flash plays in that setting, I'm like, oh, man, you're not even making the flash plays that I need you to make, right? Like, where's the interceptions? Where's the pass breakups? Just a lack of impact is like the maddening thing about a Brandon Joseph, and it just seemed like he was just kind of going through the motions. Well, if you're going to go through the motions during your final year at Notre Dame, you better kick butt in the pre-draft process. Like, you better go to East-West and kill it. You better go to the combine and kill it, or else people are going to look at the 2022 film and say, man, you were good for 2 games. You weren't good for the other 7 that you played or whatever it was.
And why were you returning punts in that game, but you couldn't play defense?
Exactly.
I mean, those are questions I'm going to want to ask him. So we'll see how that goes. 2 guys that didn't get invited, Ryan, as we wrap this up. I'm somewhat surprised by one, not surprised, and I'm very surprised by the other. The one that I'm not overly surprised by, to be honest with you, is Jason Adamiola. I think that when you look at what you and I talked about this before the season, Jason's going to have some really good film. He's got tools to work with, but there's 2 issues. Number 1, size, and number 2, his production never matched the flash.
Yep.
And it just never got better. Did some things at was he in the NFLPA Bowl?
NFLPA.
Right, what he was in.
Yep.
Had some really good things we saw in film, and then there's some other things that maybe weren't so great that you don't really want to hear about a guy like him. But for him not to get invited to the Shrine Bowl, Ryan, to the Combine, I think is it's not the end all be all at the end of the day, but it matters. I mean, it says a lot about kind of how he's viewed by the scouting industry at this point in time. So it puts a lot more emphasis on him for the pro day, but you weren't overly surprised by that one. based on the conversation you and I had before the show?
I would say this, Brian. So there was, for context, there was 51 defensive linemen, I believe, invited to the combine this year. I will be very honest about this. Of the list I saw, I do think Jason Ademilola is a better football player than a few guys that are on that list. I mean, just flat out, right? But the perception is the reality, right? And I think that we can deduce there's some tells in the NFL draft space, right? The Senior Bowl is the top of the top senior all-star game. Then there's the East-West Shrine game that plays out in Vegas. Then it's the NFLPA Bowl that's out in Pasadena, California. Just because you got invited to one of those top three doesn't mean necessarily you're going to get an invite to the combine, but I do think that it's telling that all the guys that, even though I would say a couple of them I think that Jason is better than, and Jason had a nice week out in Pasadena, and we talked about it. I did a write-up on it on the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Like, I thought he performed well. But all the players that I kind of question, I think Jason's better than that guy, they got invited to the East-West Shrine game. They got invited to the Senior Bowl. The games, the rosters are made. I know we look at Jim Nagy and we look at Eric Galko and like all those guys as if they're the ones really putting these rosters together. It's who the NFL teams say they want to see. That's how those rosters are created, right? So I wasn't overly surprised just because the minute that I saw Jason did not have an East, West, or a Senior Bowl invite, I'm like, he's going to be a fringe player as far as a combine invite. It's going to be fringe just based on the numbers. So it's unfortunate. Does it mean that he can't get drafted? It's not what it means. Does not mean. I mean, what'd you say? 80 players were drafted that weren't at the combine or something.
There was only
year?
32.
32.
The 80 was like 80 to 90, I think, is something like that. Is the stat tweet I saw of guys who went to the combine that did not get drafted.
Right. Because I mean, easy math is 262 players were drafted last year. 319 players were invited to the combine. Right. So there's a bunch of players.
Subtract the 32 that weren't there, that kind of thing. Right.
Exactly. So it's not an end-all be-all because, again, there was 32 players that were still drafted last year that did not get a combine invite. So this isn't like an end-all be-all for Jason.
No chance now getting right. Exactly.
And I mean, also, if he does not get drafted at all, that is also not the end-all be-all, right? Like Jason Ademilola is still getting a chance to come into a camp and impress. Like those opportunities are going to be there. But I wasn't overly surprised. I think that there's you're going to hear a lot of rumors from here on out in draft season. This guy's being viewed this way. This team loves this guy. Most of it is smokescreen stuff,
and
right?
Agents are going to be telling everyone, "Oh, my guys viewed it here." No.
Yes. And at the end of the day, these pre-draft events tell the story, right? A player gets invited to the NFLPA Bowl, doesn't get a combine invite. That tells you we were once hopeful that Jason Ademilola was maybe a top 150 type of player.
Possibly with a good senior year jumping into day two.
Yeah.
But
he's a borderline, most likely, based upon all the tea leaves, it's probably a fringe draftable player right now. Maybe sneaks into the back end of day three, maybe PFA. Like,
what does he have to do the rest of this process? I mean, obviously, the combine's going to, the pro day will be impactful now. That's going to be huge for him. He's got to put up really good athleticism and strength numbers. But I think the other thing too is he's going to have to really knock it out of the park in his conversations with teams.
Yep.
Because I think there's some of those questions that have arisen from his time at Notre Dame, and then also from things that you heard from different scouts and people that were part of the NFLPA Bowl about just some of those different aspects of it. So, as you said, it's not the end-all be-all. There's plenty of things he can do to help himself, but he's going to have to really thrive at the pro day. And he's going to have to really thrive when it comes to meeting teams. He's going to have to really buckle down and say, hey, what do I got to do to put my best foot forward as a person to get this role? The interesting thing is if he doesn't get drafted, then there's at least a chance that him and Justin could maybe sign with the same team.
That's very true.
I'm not saying that as a joke. I mean,
they have the same agent too. So
it'll be interesting.
It will be. I would say this, Brian, the biggest things, because you hit on one already, the pro day should be very well attended this year from the NFL side of things. Because last year you had Kyle, right? I mean, that's one big name. But this year you have 4 guys that are going to the combine, right? 4 interesting names. There's a little bit more of a volume of potential draft picks in this draft than it was last year for Notre Dame. You had Kyle, and then it was like, does Kevin Austin get drafted? Does Jack Cohn get drafted? Neither of them did at the end of the day. So you look at that, and I think that the the pro day for Notre Dame will be very well attended, which is great for Jason. Because the one thing about Jason, I'll say, I don't think either of us have ever questioned his talents, right? I think he's gonna blow things up at the pro day, man. I guarantee his numbers are stupid nutty. Like I bet he runs fast. I bet he jumps pretty high. I bet that he bench presses a lot because he's
I'd be surprised if his short area numbers aren't really, really impressive too. I mean, he just got really good quickness. But the thing that hurt Jason, as we said, it comes down to size and production. The production never matched the flash. Like, man, I watched this guy play, and it really impressed me with this, and this. And you're like, he had 2 tackles, no tackles for loss and no sacks, no pressure. You know what I mean? It was strange watching him play, but he needed a big jump this year. Now, part of it is he played through injuries all year. That's part of it. I'm sure some teams will be impressed by that as they learn more about him. Like, hey, this kid played through a lot this year, right? That's going to factor into it. But that's why this process is so important for him. Putting context into that production or lack thereof is something that potentially could help him. Hey,
I'm also looking forward to, because he measured in at 6'3" and an eighth, so a little bit taller than I thought. And then he also had 33+inch arms, which was a pretty solid number for him, right? A 79-inch wingspan. So some of the length stuff did check out, which was good to see. The one thing that you talked about, though, Brian, is last spring when NFL evaluators went through, he weighed in at 276 pounds. That's what NFS had him at. He was 284 during NFLPA Bowl week, so he gained about 8 pounds. It's great to see. Can he be more in the 290+ range? I think that number would be fantastic if he could get there and he maintains athleticism. If he does, man, like, he's got a shot.
Yeah,
right?
I don't see that. I think he needs to stay at that 284, 285 and flash. And then, you know what I mean? Because I just don't think he's a 290+ pound guy with that athleticism. I think for me, because if we're talking about a guy that's going to be a day 3 guy, you're looking for a guy that people are looking to be a rotation guy. And I can live with a rotation guy that's 5-10 pounds too light if he's really twitchy and explosive. And so I think for him, I could be wrong here. I'm just giving you my opinion, looking at it from a coaching standpoint. If I'm him, I'm focused more on, you got to be at least 280. You can't have the 7 in the middle of your number. You can't. Right. I don't care how fast you are. You can't. But if you have an 8 at the middle of your weight, and then you go do really well in the testing, I think that's where he could catch people's attention, as opposed to maybe getting up to 290 and then not testing as well. I think would be the thing for me, because as a rotation guy, okay, I don't need him to play more than 10 snaps a game, but he's going to be really twitchy and athletic in those 10 snaps. And that's where I think a team may say, hey, we like this guy because we think he can come in and give us some pass rush production.
And I think another big thing is that, he'll have the opportunity to talk to some scouts, at the pro day and throughout the process. You'll talk about the top 30 visits that, teams will bring him in for those, in-house visits, those organizational visits. And I think that, again, he's a player that, not to the same degree as Brandon Joseph, because it's much more of a hard question for Brandon. But for Jason, I would have a legitimate conversation, be like, Jason, you're incredibly talented, man. Very talented football player. Why were you not more productive the last 2 years? Have that conversation. And then let's hear what the answer is. You're going to be asked tough questions in this process. I think Jason will be able to answer those, because I do think he's a well-spoken kid from every time I've heard him. Very smart. I've heard him speak. So he has to have those answers, and he has to show out during the testing. If he does, he'll have a shot.
The guy that I was actually surprised more that wasn't invited to the combine was Tariq Bracy. Just because, number one, I think it's very obvious he's athletic. He had a very good season this year, and he's played a ton of football. And there was a lot of DBs in this. So I'll be honest with you, Ryan, I was a little bit more surprised he wasn't there. Not that I was shocked by it, but of the two, I was more surprised that he wasn't there. So this puts a lot of emphasis on him at the pro day now. He has, and now he's a guy that I think, too, could really surprise some people at the pro day. I think Tariq's going to put up really fast numbers at the pro day. I mean, we've been told this for years, that Tariq Bracy is one of the fastest players on the team. Now we'll see if he can go show that at the pro day or not. Yep. That's going to be interesting.
And those speed numbers will be very important. I mean, those short area numbers are going to be even more important, right? Because he's a true nickel at the next level. Yeah. Yep. He's not going to be viewed as an outside corner all the time, because he's just not going to be long enough. He's not going to be big enough. No one's drafting
him for that. It's special teams and the
nickel
slot.
Upside. Yeah. Yep. So if he's able to show those athletic profile, he's got a shot. He's another kid that the medicals need to check out, right? Like, he's had a little bit of durability stuff. It's interesting one, because I also think Tariq had a really nice season. I mean, we talked about it. We spoke his praises all year for the season he had, but he wasn't invited to the senior. He wasn't invited to the shrine. He wasn't invited to NFLPA. And I don't even think he was at like the Hula Bowl or NFL or College Gridiron Showcase or any of those All-Star games. So I don't know if there's obviously question marks over the size and the durability stuff. I don't know. But regardless, again, similar to what I said with Jason, there's going to be a lot of scouts in attendance at Notre Dame Pro Day. And if he knocks some socks off, it only takes one team to look at him and say, hey, man, you might not get drafted, but you will get a nice little signing bonus on a priority free agent contract. Like, we can give that to you, right? So he'll be in a camp. He'll have an opportunity. Probably not a draftable football player because of a couple, inconsistencies throughout his career, durabilities, and the size. Yep. Yeah. All those things together might prevent him from getting drafted, but it only takes one team to see him at the pro day and be like, oh, okay, I might need to go back and watch the film a little bit more on Tariq Bracy.
Ryan, that's going to do it for the draft discussion. Obviously, the rest, Justin Adamiola wasn't a starter at Notre Dame. We didn't expect him to be part of it. Obviously, Braden Lindsey's the only other one that we could really discuss, and he was he's not pursuing an NFL career.
So I kind of wish Braden, even though he's not pursuing, I wish he could just go to the pro day just so I could see some of the numbers, man. Yeah. I would really like it.
I'll tell you what, it wouldn't shock me if he'd have done that if there was a quarterback that was looking for a spot. Like if Notre Dame had a quarterback that was coming out looking to get into the draft, I wouldn't be surprised if he did that, just knowing who the kind of kid Braden is. But there's you're talking about Blake Grupe. He's not really a guy that's going to be in that conversation. And they didn't lose it. Josh Luggs was not going to be a combine guy. That's not a surprise. So this wasn't expected to be a big combine class. I just thought there might be one or two more is kind of where I thought it would be.
Okay, I thought the number would be right around 5. You got 4. You missed out on 1, but it's still a big opportunity for 4 guys to go down to Indianapolis, obviously, and really help their cause because there's different questions for each one of them, which is going to be kind of interesting headlines and a lot of things for me to write about that week, I guess, which will be fun.
Absolutely, no question about it. Let's talk a little recruiting, Ryan. Something else that you need to be writing a lot about, or excuse me, let me rephrase, that you are writing a lot about. That's what I meant to say. Did not mean to say it the way it came out.
Hey, man, I put work in, man. Come on.
Did not mean it like that. Came out wrong. My bad. Another thing that you are writing a lot about is recruiting. And Notre Dame, as we said, is in the middle of a dead period right now. And obviously there's not kids going to be on campus at the current moment, but that doesn't mean Notre Dame's not working. Obviously, Chad Bowden and the recruiting operation and Notre Dame coaches are obviously getting involved with finding new kids. And I'll say this, Ryan, I texted somebody that I know today, and I said, I don't really know how I feel about the 2024 class right now. Like a lot of the highly ranked players I've watched, I'm just like, just not blown away. And then I see these kids with no stars, 3 stars. I'm like, how is this kid a guy that's not ranked, but this kid over here is like a top 100 player? It's really weird. It's a strange class. There's some positions that are just really not strong from what I can tell right now. And I think it's putting this Notre Dame staff in a unique situation because they're having to really dive deep at some of these positions to try to go out and locate kids. It's not a great linebacker class of known top level linebackers in this class. So their
line's not incredibly deep.
Right. Safety's kind of, like last year, I have yet to see a safety so far, especially since Mike Matthews wants to be considered a wide receiver, right? Yeah. I've yet to see a safety that I put into the level of what Caleb Downs and Peyton Bowen were even before their senior year. So
agree.
There's some interesting positions here, but there's other positions that are strong. It's a really good tight end class. I mean, really good tight end class this year. I mean, there's a lot of good tight ends. So there's some other positions where it's a good class, but so far it doesn't seem to be in a great year,
right?
A super, super deep year of the top level no-brainer prospects, but it's also a year.
Wide receivers a really good one this year. I think wide receivers,
and that seems to kind of always be deep. Usually it's a very deep class. I'd still say that there's not a ton of like, holy moly. Like I was tweeting the other day about, AJ Green retired, and I've said that 2008 receiver class is still the best I've ever seen.
Julio and
it was Julio Jones, AJ Green, Michael Floyd, Jonathan Baldwin, DeVere Posey, DeAndre Brown. I think would have been a first-round pick if he didn't tear his knee up.
He was the Southern Miss kid, right?
He was a Southern Miss kid, had like 1,000 yards as a freshman at Southern Miss, and then tore his knee up. He was like 6'6", fast. Justin Blackman was in that class. Arkansas had 3 kids from that class that were really good. It was Dan Buckner never panned out, but man, I loved him coming out of high school. It was just a really, really good receiver class. This class doesn't have that top level, but it is really, really deep. So anyway, Ryan, the point is Notre Dame is really having to scour the nation, and we're seeing them throw some offers out to kids that not a lot of people knew about. And you pop into film and you're like, boy, a lot of these kids are just really impressing me. So it's going to be an interesting few weeks as we look at Notre Dame kind of throwing offers out. There was a kid that they offered the other day, Quasi Gilmer. I'm sorry. I like that kid's film more than several top 100 players that I've seen with offers so far. And then there's some top 100 guys that have really good offers, obviously, as well. Ryan Wingo's legit, right? And so it just means that it's been a unique offer prospect. Like part of me is like, man, they're getting a little desperate with some of these offers. Just because you see this kid, then you pop in the film and you're like, okay, all right, I get it, I see it. So anyway, Ryan, they're throwing more and more offers out right now, trying to grow the board. They're already about the same number of offers they had all of last cycle. They're already close to that number.
Yep.
And I think they're going to have to continue to do that because of just the way that this board is shaping up nationally. Now, kids are starting to set up visits, and that's the other big part of this. And so we've seen some offers go out, Ryan, and we're going to talk about some kids that have set up visits. That's going to be the next part of this, and just kind of what it means for Notre Dame. We'll kind of go a little bit chronologically, but we'll start with the one guy who hasn't set up the official date because I think this is an interesting one. Is it the Pele kid? Do you know how he says his first name? Have you asked him this?
David.
It is David. Okay.
Yeah.
David Pele. He said so far what he told you, Ryan, is he's going to visit 3 schools for sure. Yep. Notre Dame, Colorado, and Miami. I feel like I'm back in 1990. Like when you wrote that report, I'm like, am I back in 1990? Whereas like Notre Dame, Miami, and Colorado are the 3 best teams in the country. It's pretty cool. But so that's a big one, Ryan, because Notre Dame fans are begging for more 300-pounders on the D-line. That's one. And I've always said I would have a rule if I was Marcus Freeman. If you don't give me one Samoan defensive lineman, one Polynesian defensive lineman, in every class, you're going to have to find a new job. I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but you get the point. He checks all those boxes, and he's not from out west. Well, not now, right? I think originally he's from out west.
He's from Anchorage, Alaska originally.
That's out west. Yeah, that's pretty west.
Okay, sorry.
It's further west than any other continent.
I don't have very good Alaska.
It's California, geography. Then Canada, then Alaska. So yes, it's west.
Okay, sure.
Ryan's like, I always saw it down here on the map.
No, I knew it was up, but yeah.
But anyway, him being from Pennsylvania only helps. He was going to go to IMG. He's not now. So there's a lot of things happening here. Ryan, what's the latest with David? You had a chance to talk to him. What's the latest? And I did find an interesting note about who is driving that recruitment. It was very pleasant surprise to see that.
Yeah. Well, he's a very interesting kid, Brian, because like you said, I mean, he was living in Anchorage, Alaska until he was 14 years old. They moved him out to Pennsylvania. Him and his family, I should say, moved out to Pennsylvania, was thinking about going to IMG, decided not to, obviously, for a senior year because he wanted to stay with his brother. He has and I put it in the note on the board, his plan right now is to commit July 4th. That is his chance. That is when he is planning on doing it because his brother, that is his birthday, and he wants to get everything done before his senior season starts in late August. So that's kind of the timeline. Like Brian said, he's going to visit Notre Dame, Miami, and Colorado for sure. Does not have official dates set yet, but those are 3 schools that he said he is definitely visiting. There's no doubt about it. He's also the cousin of Penn and Noah Sewell, which is a funny little note as well. But, I mean, 6'2", 305 pounds, really talented football player. Notre Dame's going to get him on campus here in the next couple months. And, I mean, he spoke about Notre Dame in the top group of schools that he said was recruiting him the best. And the single person that he mentioned in this recruitment was Al Golden, which I was, again, a little surprised about.
Because let's explain why. We rarely hear kids bring up Al Golden.
Yes.
And when they do, it usually is like in passing, it's like the 3rd or 4th guy involved.
Yep.
So hearing that he's heavily involved with this kid, Ryan, was a very good sign.
And I love it too, Brian, because let's look at Al Golden's background, right? He played at Penn State. He recruited the state of Pennsylvania a ton.
From Jersey, right? From
Jersey. He knows this area. And David plays in Penn State country. Like that's where he's from, right? That's a lot of the fans want players to go to that type of environment. So I think that it's really big, one, for Al Golden just to get more involved in general, because we just haven't heard enough about him. But also Al Golden has recruited the state of Pennsylvania. He knows the state of Pennsylvania very well, and he knows this region very well. So I was pleasantly surprised to hear that. And he spoke very highly of Al Golden too. Literally, he mentioned the schools to me that have been recruiting him well. He mentioned Colorado, he mentioned Miami, he mentioned Penn State, he mentioned Notre Dame. The only coach he mentioned across every of the schools was Al Golden. The only one, which was very interesting.
This is what frustrates me. Yeah. Because Al Golden has made a reputation. We talked about he was hired. He was a very good recruiter at Virginia, and is a guy that is known as a very strong recruiter. His recruiting at Notre Dame or lack thereof has been about effort. It's not about him. It's not like you've seen him, right? He's a very engaging guy. He's a very smart guy. He's got a voice that's like, you kind of walk through him. He starts talking, you listen, right? It's just he's not doing it. And that's the frustrating thing. So at least it's a good sign, at least with this kid. And hopefully we start hearing more of this. If he's going to stay at Notre Dame, we start hearing more of this. Because there's no questioning that Al Golden has the ability to be a very strong recruiter. And when he's done it, he did get involved in selling his plan to Jaden Alsbury. Did a great job with it. It's not about a lack of ability. It's a lack of willingness to do the work.
Right.
Like without Washington, I question a little bit of both. Does he have the ability to really connect with kids at the level that other coaches have? I question that. Does he have the work ethic? I question that. Without Golden, I don't question the ability to recruit and close. I question the work he's putting in. So That's a good thing to see him get involved because he is a major asset when he wants to be as a recruiter.
And could I say too, Brian, another good note on David that I thought is pertinent to this conversation is that I asked him what is most important to him when selecting a school. The first thing he said was relationships. That's the biggest thing for him. And the fact that he named a singular coach about the relationship that he's building with Al Golden, I thought was a very good sign because he is a very family-oriented young man. That's why he stayed in Pennsylvania and didn't go to IMG, to be close to his brother and not have to leave, right? So that all, I think, speaks well for Notre Dame's chances here. Again, you have to get him on campus. You have to impress. You have to continue building this relationship. But I think they're in a pretty good spot with David Pele as they are right now, currently.
The Sewell thing explains the Miami interest because obviously Noah and Penny played for Mario Cristobal at Oregon. Noah more, I think Penny only for 1 year, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Because he didn't play in 2020. Didn't he sit out 2020?
He sat out 2020.
Right.
Correct.
So, and then Noah obviously committed there and played for him there, obviously. So
it's a talented family, man.
It is. Yes, it is. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. All right, Ryan, let's get to the next kid. So we don't know his visit date, but one date we do know, Ryan, is Bodie Cahoon, who is from the state of Virginia, from Patrick Henry High School, which is a sort of the northern part of the state. He is a commit to Ohio State for lacrosse. Yep. So is he still committed to Ohio State for lacrosse right now? Okay, so he is an Ohio State lacrosse commit, but he's starting to get a lot more interest for football, Ryan. Just give a little bit of backstory there and then let people know that he got offered a couple days ago and has already set up a visit to Notre Dame.
Yes, yeah, really interesting because, like you said, he's been committed to Ohio State as a lacrosse player. I asked him point blank, like, what's the, is there a course for action where you just play football? And he said, yes, I'm leaving everything open right now. I love football, and I am listening to all the offers and the pitches that are out there right now. So he's been offered recently, the last couple weeks. NC State's come in, Virginia Tech has come in, Tennessee has come in. So some good schools have now really started to pay him a lot of attention because the opportunity to play football on the next level is there. And he's a 6'3", 220 pounds linebacker that plays midfield in lacrosse. He's a really impressive athlete, man. Like, you pop on the film, he reminded me a lot, Brian, of Phil Picciotti in last year's class that ended up at Oklahoma, like long and super explosive. Like, that's the things that really popped to me about Bodie. And so he does have a visit set up to Notre Dame. He knows that he is going to be there on March 22nd. I think, March 22nd is when he's going to make his first official visit. Funny story, he's a Virginia guy now, but he was originally an Indiana kid. He grew up in Indiana. So he's very well aware of Notre Dame.
Front page story, correct?
Yes.
I believe about him as well. Okay.
Yep. So he is from Indiana, he's very well aware of what Notre Dame brings to the table, the brand, all that great stuff. But despite him being from Indiana, he's never been on campus at Notre Dame. So March 22nd is going to be the first time on campus. So interesting football player. I think there's legit interest from his side. There's no doubt because, I mean, he gets offered and he immediately makes the decision to take the visit. He's also excited to get back to Indiana to see some of his old friends and do all that type of stuff over the couple days that he'll be in town. But a very interesting player, Bodie Cahoon, because, I think that he's a little bit of a late riser from a rankings perspective because he's a lacrosse player committed to Ohio State, right? So now that he's really giving football a shot, I think that he's going to rise. And I think that he's I'll be very honest, and we talked about this on the board. There's a couple offers that I looked at over the last few weeks that I'm just like, I don't know, maybe. But I watched that kid and I'm just like, nah, that kid can play. Like I would recruit that kid. Like there's no doubt about it. So
I need to see him sized up. That's my thing. Because he's a Mike. I mean, on the film, he's a Mike. I don't view him as a Will. He's a Mike. I need to see if he's a legit 220-ish, 215-ish. I need to see the frame. He runs well. I don't think he's as explosive as I think you think he is, but we see him in a very similar light. I think just the degrees is a little bit different. But you've also watched a lot more film of him than I have. He didn't blow me away, but I like some things I saw as a Mike.
Yeah.
You know, and even like when he's coming off the edge, you see certain things that I like as a Mike. Yep. I like him a lot better going from middle to tackle than I would from, sideline stuff, right?
Yes.
So I've got to see the body. If the body checks out, because that's the thing about Phil Picciotti that I like, right? Like Phil Picciotti is going to be 6'3", 240, right? When it's all said and done. He's got a great frame. If this kid is a legit 220, 225 now, and he's got the frame, then this kid can be 235, 240-ish, fill out, really be a thumper, a Mike, then sure, let's look for him. Because I do think they need a pure Mike in this class. I don't think they have a lot of pure Mikes on their roster. And I mean pure Mike is a guy that fits the Mike purely. I'm not saying like a 6'2", 250-pound thumper, right? Like that's not really a thing anymore, but just a guy that guy has everything you need in a Mike linebacker in this defense is what I'm referring to. And if he has that, then I'll look at him. Because as you said, you're going to have to take some flyers in this class of linebacker, most likely, especially at Mike. Because even some of the better linebackers they're on now that Adarius Hayes isn't in, and we kind of thought that he might even outgrow the position relatively quickly. But a lot of linebackers that we look at that I think are more high-level guys, Ryan, are more pure Rover Will types, right? It's like, for example, Kylan Singleton, who I like quite a bit. He's a really good player. Really he's 190 to 200 pounds. He's not a Mike. Yep. He's a pure Rover Will type.
Yep.
And so there's just not a lot of Mikes on the board. So when it comes to that position especially, you're going to need to say, okay, let me go try to find some high upside kid. And honestly, with the way you've recruited linebacker the last 2 years, it's okay.
You take a chance.
It's fine to do that. Exactly. So it's also not a great year linebacker from what I've seen so far. Yep. And some of the top linebackers on the board are either already off the board. 2 of them are to Florida already. One of them you expected. You expected Mylan Graham to go to Florida. His dad played there. But the other, Adarius Hayes, you thought you had a shot with for a while, and then like Sammy Brown, that's going to be an incredibly hard pull out of Georgia, out of SEC territory. He's visited and all that, but okay,
that kid's a freak show, man. Sammy Brown's a freak show.
Yeah, and he's more athlete right now than he is football player, to be honest with you. But the athleticism is insane.
He's like a 600-meter guy playing linebacker. It's nuts.
Next guy on the board, Ryan, is a guy that I really wish he would not have set a visit for this date, but I'll take it. And that is Caleb Brewer set his visit for April 1st. And I never like it when kids visit on April 1st because then you just have to deal with one of the things that I find the most annoying things in the world are April Fool's jokes. I still can't believe adults do this, but it is what it is. But that's a big one, Ryan, because that is an offensive lineman that the Notre Dame staff loves. Caleb Brewer from Pennsylvania.
And I also love him. And I know you also love him on film as well. He's a really talented kid, listed 6'5", 300 pounds. He's down near more in the 287 range right now because he's wrestling, but he played 295 last year during football. He'll be well over 300 pounds this year when football season kicks around. So all-state wrestler, top 5 heavyweight in the state of Pennsylvania. He's out of Reading, Pennsylvania, Wyomissing High School, which Javin Williams, who's on the offensive line for them last year, now at Penn State. I think there's high interest in Notre Dame. I think there's very high interest. This will be his first visit to campus. He's already spoke glowingly about Chad Bowden, glowingly about Harry Heastand. He said a lot of great things just about the communication that those guys have had with his high school coach and people around him, obviously, right? So really good reviews. I think getting him on campus is going to be massive because he's a kid that I don't think he likes recruiting very much. Just don't think he does, which most offensive linemen don't typically like recruiting very much. They just want to find the fit and then figure it out. I think that ultimately, in the end, this is going to be a Notre Dame-Penn State battle. This is what I believe. I think Notre Dame does have a legit shot, and I think getting him up for April 1st is when he's taking his visit, which Brian already alluded to a little bit. And I made sure to verify, like, you're not joking with me, right? Like April 1st, ha ha ha. No, I'm going to be there April 1st. So he verified that. He told me that a few weeks ago that was the plan. And then yesterday I talked to him and that was officially set in stone because he was trying to get there sometime in March. But then the windows did not sync up with his wrestling season and Notre Dame's going to be on spring break. And there was just it didn't really match up. So April 1st, Caleb Brewer will be on campus. And I think that will be a massive opportunity for Notre Dame. If they're able to really impress him, I think that they stand a very good chance to beat out Penn State. But obviously, I think that is a Notre Dame-Penn State battle for sure.
I would throw Michigan in there just from some of the things that I've been told. I think Michigan's a player. I don't think they're second right now, but I think they're in that group where they could. I mean, and look, they're back-to-back Joe Moore Award winners, and they've recruited some East Coast kids that have gone there and done pretty well. So I would throw Michigan in that as a team they're going to have to beat out as well. But yes, I do think Notre Dame is in a very good place, but they got to close, right? That's going to be the key. Got to close on this kid. As we continue kind of go down this list, Ryan, I think we didn't spend a lot of time on Caleb Brewer. We've talked a lot about him on previous shows. That's why we're not spending as much time on his now. But yes, he's very talented. Like, to me, he's another example of this is a funky recruiting cycle because that's one of the best offensive linemen I've seen in this class. And he's a 3-star. I think
only rated
the board.
Only rated by one platform still. I think he's only a 3-star.
Even only rated by one? I'm going to look that up right now. I can't believe
Pretty
that's
sure.
still a thing. So let me just look this up. That's just late. That's just late. Because here's the thing. They've all seen this kid on film because there was a top 100 player on his team last year. Yes, On3 is the only one that's even ranked this kid. That's just silly.
Yeah.
Absolutely silly. None of the others have even. How do you have a top 100 list and you haven't even evaluated this kid? Like, that's just okay. And you guys want to know why we think rankings are good. And here's why that matters. I'm going to go off a little bit of a tangent here. Here's why that matters. Because they are very slow to add kids like this way up the ranking until like the very end of the process. And if at all. And so to me, it's just, you shouldn't be putting a prospect list together when you don't have. I mean, there's so many kids like this, Ryan, where like these are really good football players, like top 150 football players, that they either have as 3 stars because they've just like what they'll do is, and I know Rivals did this. I don't know if they still do this, but they did when I worked there. When they create a profile for a kid, they just throw a 3-star tag on them, and then eventually get around to offering them. I think that's what's happening with Leonard Moore. I really do. I think that they just kind of looked at the film. I mean, not even looked at the film, just looked at the profile, looked at the offer list and said, okay, 3-star. Right. I don't think that they've really evaluated that kid. And Caleb Brewer, they're admitting they haven't evaluated because there's no grade on him. Like, Javen Williams was the 2023 lineman on his roster. How do you not have watched him and have a semblance of what this kid can do? Right. I don't understand it. It makes no sense to me.
Brian, another one that I've talked about a couple of times is the DeMello Jones kid out of Georgia, right? It's like he didn't have any ranking whatsoever, unranked across the board. And then he gets Alabama, Georgia, Notre Dame, Ohio State. And then all of a sudden he's a 4-star, number 40 athlete in the country, I think by On3. And nobody else is nobody's evaluating him.
Right. Yeah. What did On3 base that on? They didn't base it off film. They based it off his offer list. That's 100%. It.
Yep.
And it's just another example of why the ranking system is just very, very flawed. Very flawed. So, Ryan, let's go next. We have him coming April 1st. The last player we're going to talk about is a young man with a familiar name. And that's Kennedy Urlacher, who is the son of former Chicago Bear linebacker and NFL Hall of Famer Brian Urlacher. So he is they're offering a lot of kids from Arizona, which is wise. It's a state that's growing and growing and growing, and you want to start building more and more relationships with coaches and teams from that area. And hey, they've had a guy kind of pan out relatively well from there recently, Ryan, a kid named Benjamin Morrison. Not sure if you remember him.
Decent player.
Said sarcastically. So Kennedy Urlacher. And y'all are going to find this very surprising. He likes to hit.
Yes, he likes to hit a lot, man. He hits like someone that's much bigger than he is, because right now he's like 6', 6'1", 180 pounds. But he hits like, I thought he was like 205 when I was watching him throw his weight around, man. Like he's a really physical football player. Safety out of Chandler High School in the state of Arizona, so one of the best high schools in the state of Arizona. They also have, they play against a lot of great competition out there. There's a lot of players on his team even that are getting serious looks, right? And he's a young man that is going to be visiting Notre Dame for the first time. April 15th is going to be the first time that he takes a visit to Notre Dame. Someone, of course, immediately asked me on the board, is Brian Urlacher going to be there? Yes, he is going to be there. And also his uncle's taking the trip with him as well. So
Casey?
It might be. I'm not 100% sure. But
you're not sure which uncle it is?
Okay. Just said uncle. Yeah.
Gotcha. I'm not sure how many brothers Brian Urlacher has, or if it may be his an uncle from the other side.
On the other side, yeah. But regardless, got a couple talented linebackers, safeties that are coming to town on April 15th to check out Notre Dame for the first time. This one's a wait and see for me, from the Pulse perspective. I think he's very intrigued by Notre Dame, right? That's why he obviously made the visit and wants to go from Arizona to Notre Dame. But, I think that this is I think coming out of the visit, we'll have a better pulse on just how serious this interest is from both sides. Because I think obviously they're intrigued by him tremendously, which is why they want him to come on a visit. I think there's reciprocates that interest from Kennedy's side of things. But I think it's going to be a big opportunity to get him on campus to just see how big that interest is ultimately.
I'll be honest with you. I don't want him at safety. This to me is the modern Rover. Like, he's not the biggest kid, but he's got some length to him. And look, we talk about DNA, right? DNA matters. His dad had a huge growth spurt when he got to college, and then again in the NFL. So there could be potentially another growth spurt. But this is a kid that can play the Rover, and he's long and he can cover. But more importantly, he can stick.
Yes,
like I'd rather have a kid like this at Rover than a converted linebacker. Drew Tranquil from 2017. That played in 2017, but now, and this isn't that he can't play safety. It has nothing to do with the fact that he can't play safety. I just think this gives you a lot more matchup options if you are looking at a Rover like this, where you don't have to sub out as much if you have like a Jack Kaiser type of player there who's more of a traditional linebacker with how he runs and plays. That's just me. I think this is a kid. Now, this isn't a Thomas Harper type of safety Rover, but closer to that than it is to linebacker Rover. So that's the position I really like him for, Ryan, to be honest with you.
I definitely want to keep him in the alley, man. My dude is a head hunter. Like, I want him working inside out and being just that ferocious player coming down in run support. Like, that's the best areas for Kennedy Urlacher right now, man. He's an imposing force. And to your point, his dad was a late bloomer from a physical perspective. Who's to say that Kennedy Urlacher doesn't grow 2 inches and then he's got a little bit of a bigger frame that maybe he's a will eventually? Like, who knows?
Right. But right now, even with just a normal growth spurt, a normal maturation from what he is now, he's a Rover to me. And I mean that compliment. He can run. I mean, if they like him at safety, fine, play him at safety. I'm just telling you what I like him as, and I'm saying it as a compliment. It's not because like you want to avoid the situations where a guy has to move because you don't think he can run somewhere.
Sure.
Why do you want him a Rover? Well, he just doesn't really run well enough for a safety. Well, then he's probably not going to be an elite Rover either.
Sure.
Right? It'd be one thing if you're seeing a guy like that and you're going to move him to will linebacker. That's a different story. It's more about, hey, this guy can play there. And that's what I like about him there.
I think it's similar to the Brandon Hillman thing this past cycle, right? It's like, could Brandon Hillman play safety? Sure. But, man, he could be a dang good Rover, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So I like Kennedy Urlacher a lot. I don't really care to talk a lot about his dad. I kind of want the kid to have his moment, but I do think it's impossible to ignore the DNA from the standpoint of the growth spurt aspect of it. I don't think you can ignore that, right? And we've talked about that before in the past, but the kid can play. And I did miss a guy, Ryan, a wide receiver, Davis Washington, is also going to be on campus here pretty soon, actually, the next month.
Yep. David Washington, wide receiver out of Arbor View High School in Las Vegas, Nevada. 6 foot, 185 pounds, listed 6'1" in some places, but I'm telling you, he's not 6'1". Very talented football player, though. I've been really impressed by Chancey Stuckey because you mentioned Quasi Gilmer earlier in the show, Brian. I think he's identified a couple really nice underrated wide receivers in 2024. I like David Washington's film. Excuse me. I think he's a talented player. He will be visiting Notre Dame for the first time, March 31st. He also has some Midwest ties, so he's always been out west. But he's got family in Gary, Indiana. He's also got family in Chicago, Illinois. So he's, he knows about football. He knows about Notre Dame. So he's planning a little bit of a longer trip out to see Notre Dame for a few days because he wants to check in on his family in Chicago. He wants to check in with his family in Gary, Indiana. Wants to spend some time out there and get to see the family. So I think he is, from my initial conversations with him, I think he's very intrigued by Notre Dame. I do. I mean, this is a kid that he's an interesting talent. I think that he's just one of those really good all-around wide receivers, in my opinion. I wouldn't say that he excels in one area. Like, I don't think he's a burner. I don't think he's a huge wide receiver, but he just does a little bit of everything pretty well.
He doesn't excel at any physical traits, but he excels in a lot of the technical things. Like, he's not like he's got a lot of work with his stance and start. Like, he's got a very flat front and back leg. There's some things like that I think slow his initial burst down, but you just watch some kids play around. You're like, this kid just has a natural feel for how to play this game. He has a natural feel for top-ends. He has a natural feel for finding open spots. He has a natural feel for catching the football. And those are the kind of guys people say, well, where do all these receivers come from that go to these schools I never heard of and they get to the NFL? It's because they don't have those traits.
Yeah.
But in the NFL, elite athleticism is all fine and dandy, but we've seen a lot of 4.34 and low 4.4 guys not do a dang thing in the NFL. But you know who does? These 4.55, 4.6 guys that just are master craftsmen.
Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp.
Right.
Yeah,
a ton of those guys, right? The kid from LSU that ran a 4.7, Jarvis Landry. He's another example. They just know how to play the game. This kid has some technical work to do at the snap, right? In his stance and start. But when you get him going, he knows how to play the game. And he's not going to blow you away. But then you're just like, he's that kid that you look at and you're like, man, that Braylon James guy's legit. Did you see those 3 catches and the long touchdown? And then you look and you down at the stats and you're like, who's this kid that had 6 catches for 83 yards that didn't really do anything flashy, but just moved the chains and did his job? And, that's what kind of kid he is, honestly, Ryan. And if the stance and start can improve, maybe then his vertical speed improves a little bit because he puts himself behind the 8 ball with his stance at the line. Did you notice that? Like very stiff-legged at the snap. He's got to improve some of that stuff. But once he gets into a running posture, this kid's got some skill that I like. Now, I'm not saying I'd take him right this second. I'm still in the evaluation process, just like Notre Dame is. But you said it correctly. There's some kids on the board that aren't going to blow people away because of just they're not the Braylon James physicality. They don't have Jaden Greathouse's size and length. They don't have some other guys. He doesn't have Caleb Smith's shiftiness and elusiveness and smoothness. It's like, dang, this kid just knows how to make plays. And that's one position on offense where you can thrive with a guy like that.
They're not the exact same players, but I think that him and Rico Flores have a similar profile in that sense, right? Like physically, is there one area that Rico Flores excels at? Probably not, but there's a lot of ones that he's very good at, right? That he's good to very good at. So that's how I feel about David Washington. I do. And I'm interested to see how he comes out of that visit because, I've spoken with him and I will say this. I don't think that staying out west is that important to him, just based upon my conversations. Like, I don't think this is a foregone conclusion. This kid's going to go to a school in California, stay in Washington, Oregon. Like, I don't think that's a foregone conclusion. I think that he is very open to potentially going out to the Midwest. He's got family out there, like I said, in Indiana and Chicago. So I think that there has an opportunity. He's very excited about this opportunity. You can tell every kid says that they're blessed for an offer, right? That they're very grateful. But talking to David, I know legitimately that he feels very blessed for this opportunity that's in front of him. And he's a 4-star caliber player by a couple different platforms. He's top 250, I think, by at least one. So this is a talented football player, man. And again, Chancey Stuckey is getting his eyes on some maybe slightly underrated football players at the wide receiver position in 2024. But certainly guys that are very talented. There's no doubt. So March 31st, David Washington's coming to Notre Dame.
Yeah, and this kid's never going to be a super highly ranked kid. He just doesn't have the elite athletic tools that people look for. And I'm not even saying that that's a wrong thing. But what I am saying is that this kid knows how to play. And I'm looking at one. He's ranked in the top 230 by Rivals and ESPN, which is accurate. He's ranked as a 4-star by 247 Sports. And then On 3 has him as the number 77 receiver in the country. And I'm just like, come on, y'all. be serious now. But that's just, they have these really weird rankings where this kid's just like way down compared to everybody else. But it is what it is. So that's the recruiting updates, Ryan. We're going to go to the mailbag next. But before we do, folks, please hit that like button. Please hit that subscribe button. Hit that notification bell. Make sure you share this podcast. Comment on it. And if you ask questions or you comment constructively, we'll try our best to engage with you in the chats as well. Make sure you sign up for the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Sign up for the CFB Nation channel, and we'll check out the videos we have there. We put up the new video today. The CFB All-America guys, which is obviously Bill Troche and Bill Bender from Sporting News, have a show on CFB Nation. They do once a week now in the offseason. They brought in someone who covers Nebraska for a living for Husker Online. Did a great job. Steve did a great job with them. They talked about Matt Rule. Very interesting take, where if you look at Matt Rule, he's really turned every team he's been a part of around, but it's always taken some time. All his first years, at 3 of his 4 stops, I think his teams were actually worse in his first year than they were from what he inherited. The only exception being, I think, the Panthers, because they had the exact same record. So, but in college, his first year, if I'm remembering the tweet, the intel that Bill sent me correctly, he had a worse record in each of those 3 at Temple, Baylor, and then who am I missing here? I think there was one other. There was one other. No, it'd have been Temple, Baylor, and Carolina. Those are the 3 places he's been head coach. So it'd have been the two college places. But it was a very interesting take. And then they talked about the quarterback battle between Casey Thompson and Jalen Sims. And then, of course, they got into the Alabama hires. They gave their take on the coordinator hires that Alabama had. And then they discussed the top 10 quarterbacks coming back in college football. And Sam Hartman was in the top 5. So that was a very interesting conversation that they had as well. So you definitely want to check that out. And you can find that at the CFB Nation channel on our podcast app. And also those videos are uploaded as well onto the CFB Nation YouTube page. So definitely make sure you check that out as well. But of course, everything begins with Irish Breakdown. Let's dive into the mailbag, Ryan. We got a lot of good questions today, and from all different topics, and honestly, not as many questions about the offensive coordinator hire. So I'm hoping that maybe we've answered all of those questions so far. Who knows?
You just opened the floodgates, man.
I know. But here we go from Tyler Binge. He says, mailbag, when there is a bad first-round draft pick, is it more on the scouting team or the GM? This is an interesting. I'm curious to hear what you're going to say on this one.
I mean, it can be both, Tyler. It can be both. I mean, there could be a bad evaluation from a scouting staff, and more often than not, I'll say it like this: general managers don't always listen to the scouting staff. Like I talked about the Al Davis story, I think, on this podcast yesterday or two, where the whole scouting team was like, we have a trade back option. This is the Jamarcus Russell draft. They had a trade back option where they probably could have gotten Adrian Peterson or Joe Thomas. Ended up in trading back and getting more draft capital. Al Davis completely overrided everyone and was like, nope, we're taking Jamarcus. That's my guy. That's the face of my franchise, right? So I think I've heard a lot more stories like that than I have vice versa, right?
Wasn't it a similar story with the Mitch Trubisky quarterback situation that the scouts were saying it's Mahomes, it's Deshaun Watson, but it was the GM that fell in love with Trubisky?
It happens all the time, man, because look, if you're the top of the food chain, right? You're the general manager. You can choose to listen and to use all your resources wisely, or you can think that you know everything, right? And I think that there's some general managers that think that they know everything and they know more than the scouts that they have in the door. I mean, I just heard one too, Brian. There was a Tutu Atwell was drafted by the Rams in the 2nd round a couple years ago. Nobody on the scouting staff liked him. They had 6th-round grades on him. But you know who liked him? The owner. The owner liked him. So we're going to draft him, right? So a lot of those stories exist, Tyler. So I'll say that this to be fair. There are some really bad evaluations by scouts that put you down the board. And that just does not do anything for anyone. Obviously, that sabotages you from the first step. But I would say more times than people wouldn't want to admit, it's usually the general managers and the higher-ups, the decision makers, that just do not listen to what their scouts think, in my opinion.
And for the record, in 2 years, Tutu Atwell has 18 catches and 1 touchdown in 2 years for a 2nd-round pick.
They could have had Creed Humphrey, man. Could have had Creed Humphrey. And
it looks like he has trouble standing on the field, which shouldn't shock anyone who saw him. He was in he weighed in the 140-pound range at the combine, correct? Wasn't he the one that was like 140-something pounds? I'm pretty sure he was.
I think he was 140-something before the combine. They weighted at like 152 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's very small.
It's not good. It's not good. So I laugh when I see him listed at like 165. I'm like, yeah, right. Okay, sure. Whatever you say, fellas. Whatever you say. All right. So let's go to this next one. I do think it's an interesting dynamic because you want to listen to your football people, but at the same time, it's your butts on the line if the pick doesn't pan out. I mean, you're not going to. Well, it was this regional scout that told me this guy was really good, and sorry that we missed on him. I mean, if these picks don't pan out, it's the GM that gets fired.
Yes.
So you've got to make it. But I just feel like some of these guys think that they're football people and they're not. When it's not a shock that Jerry Jones, who played Division I football, it's like he doesn't know football, but it's not a shock that when other people were primarily making decisions, mainly Jimmy Johnson, that team was winning and they haven't won since he left. Because Jerry Jones thinks he's a football guy, and he's not. Daniel Snyder thinks he's a football guy. He's not. Pat Bowlen knew he was a businessman. He let the football people make the football decisions with one exception when Dan Reeves tried to trade John Elway. So one time Pat Bowlen said, not happening. But those, I think, are the best owners. The guy says, hey, look, I'm hiring you to do a job. Go do it. What do you need from me? Tell me what you need resources wise, and we'll make it happen. But you're the football people. It's not a surprise that the teams winning championships are the ones whose owners run the business and let the football people do the football.
You know what the backwards part of NFL scouting is, Brian? Is that when scouting is a young man's game. People act like it's this archaic old man game, right? No, it's a young man's game. Why? Because when a scout gets to a certain level and you have to pay him more money, you don't re-up his contracts. So then you bring in younger scouts that aren't as experienced, that cost less money, right? So to your point, general managers, and I can understand it for some, if you have a young staff that doesn't have any experience and you kind of question, how good they are as far as their evaluations, why would I listen to them all the time, right? So it's very counterproductive to how people just fulfill scouting spots in general, because there's a lot of guys that just come in and they'll get area scout jobs by the time they're like 25, 26. And it's just like, what has he proven that you know that? But the 50-year-old that demands more money, we don't have time for that.
Right.
It's all a money game, man. Right. It's all a money game.
I have sat next to some scouts that are very good.
Yep.
And I've sat next to some scouts who sat down for that game and had no clue who the players in the field were. And it's just like, you didn't do any work before this game? He's like, yeah, I'm looking at number 7, like what? Like seriously? And then you'll see some of these guys go to these games and it's like they're eating the whole time, they're like hardly paying attention. You're like, yeah, this guy's not it. He's not it. Then you have the guys that are serious. They got their notepad, they got their binoculars, like, okay, this guy is putting work in. He may not know what he's looking at, but he's at least putting work in,
Yep.
So it is kind of interesting watching the different dynamics for that. And the good scouts will come up to people like us and ask us, hey, what did you know this kid during recruiting? Yeah, I did. What'd you think of him? What kind of families he come from? I've had scouts come up to me and ask me those questions before. That's a guy doing a job.
Exactly. Why wouldn't you? That's a resource. You're a resource for them.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're all right there in a room with you. So
exactly.
Those are the good scouts, in my opinion. You have a couple super chats here. One from Tyler Evans, Isaiah Foskey, and Michael Mayer. What NFL teams would they fit perfectly with? Ryan, that one is all you.
I think that people are going to think it's a little bit of a cop out, right? But I think that Michael Mayer could fit any team. I don't think there's a limit to what Michael Mayer can do. I really don't, man. I've seen him mocked to so many different teams at this point. I mocked him to the Lions, and Lions fans lost their minds because, like, why would we draft another tight end in the first round? Because he's a really good player? Maybe that's why. Like, whatever. But I think that for me, Michael Mayer is perfect in a system. I'm not directly answering this question, Tyler, because it would be lazy of me to pretend like I've watched every single offensive system in the NFL, in my opinion, right? But for teams that have really nice separators on the outside, guys that can push it vertically, if you are able to clear out and like Michael Mayer just dominate the middle of the field, man, that's the system that I want him in. For Isaiah Foskey, I want him in a 4-man front. I don't want to mess with him as a stand-up rusher. I want him in a 4-man front and go that way, brother. I don't want you in space at all if I don't have to. I want to kind of unlock those things. So a 4-man front for Isaiah Foskey. Again, that could be Seattle Seahawks, Philadelphia Eagles. Philadelphia Eagles is actually a really interesting one because they've done pretty well with guys that are similar profiles to him. Like Josh Sweat that came out of Florida State a few years ago, longer guy, explosive, not incredibly flexible, Brandon Graham is a completely different body type. He's a sawed-off, like 6'1.5", 250-pound guy, but he's another guy that's not a corner turner. He's a speed-to-power guy. So Philadelphia Eagles is one that pops out. Seattle Seahawks, I think, like the Isaiah Foskey style. Regardless, I want a four-man front, and I want to let Isaiah Foskey go.
I'm going to ask you a question. So I'm praying that Sean Payton is the guy for the Broncos. Praying.
Yes.
I didn't hate the draft compensation they gave up.
Yeah,
relative to what it was.
Wasn't as bad as you heard. Yeah.
Correct. They gave up the number 29 pick this year, which is like, okay, it sucks. And they gave up a third-round pick, next year?
Yeah.
Or no, a second-round pick next year, but then got a third back next year. So basically they swapped swap picks basically next year, essentially, for Sean Payton. I hope he turns out to be the guy. I always get nervous about guys that are that way. So having said that, I couldn't tell you that I know enough about his offense to say what kind of tight ends he uses, but I also know that Greg Dulcich ain't the answer at tight end for the Broncos.
Oh,
could the Broncos be a team that could use a guy like Michael Mayer if they were picking in that? I'm just trying to get a sense for kind of like what you think about that. Obviously, Denver's not going to be able to get there because they don't have that kind of pick, but what would you say? Like, let's say they traded back into the first round, if he falls into the 20s, what would you think about that one?
I do think that Sean Payton's a really good guy, a really good offensive guy. So I think he can make it work. But I mean, Brian, the history tells me it's not the greatest fit of all time, just because you've seen Jimmy Graham, you've seen Colby Fleener. Like they're more like the detached, like true, they're the detached Y guys.
Kind of guys. Yeah. Okay.
They can run fast in a straight line, and then they have the incredible length to kind of separate. Okay. So, I mean, could Michael Mayer still flourish in that offense? I think to a degree, but I don't know if that's the best possible fit for him personally.
Okay. That's curious. Thank you for answering that. I was very curious about that one. Here's the other question I have for you.
Yes.
Isaiah Foskey.
Yep.
Does he need to be in a 3-4 defense?
Because
I really question about whether or not he can put his hand in the ground.
I think you have to force the issue, man, because in a 3-4, he's going to get caught in space sometimes where I just don't want him there. Like I just don't, So ideally, I want Isaiah Foskey to fall in with a really good defensive line coach, and let's get you comfortable coming out of a 3-point stance. Let's make that happen, man, because in a 4-man front, it's a lot harder to get that guy stuck in space. In a 3-4, I just have bad visions of in a certain offensive structure where like we're motioning a lot, maybe we're trading a ton, where Isaiah Foskey gets stuck, dropping into coverage and doing that. And Isaiah can do some of that stuff. Like we saw him at Syracuse run stride for stride with Sean Tucker down the field on a wheel route, right? Like he can do some of that stuff, but that's not what he's best at potentially. Like I think that does hinder his development a little bit. So I would like a 4-man front. Again, I really hope he lands with a good defensive line coach. Because the crazy part about Isaiah Foskey is he left Notre Dame as the all-time leader in sacks at 26.5, but he's not near his ceiling, man. He's not even close. So I hope he lands in a 4-man front with a really good coach. I really do.
He's just got to show that he can do it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And I have some questions about whether or not he can do that. So we'll find out. I got to think that's something that either the combine or at the pro day, some NFL team's going to say, I want to see you put your hand in the ground and come off the line.
Sure.
I'd be shocked if he gets through this draft process without someone making him put his hand in the ground.
One 3-man front that I actually think would be an interesting conversation for him as a 3-4 alignment is the Baltimore Ravens are a team that has done a good job of getting those longer, maybe stiffer defensive ends, explosive. I think of Zadarius Smith. I think of Preston Smith, even a Matt Judon that's now with the New England Patriots. Yeah. Like they've done well with those types of power rushers.
I thought you were going to say Seattle because Pete has that funky defense where I think a guy like that could maybe fit in a little bit.
I did in the first part. Yeah. Seattle and the Philadelphia Eagles were the two teams that I did mention.
I'm sorry. I was going through the questions. My bad.
You weren't listening, man.
I wasn't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Ryan. Please forgive me. All right. Let's get some more super chats. For Michael S. Was Al Golden the top choice last year for defensive coordinator, or were others initially preferred? I'll just say this. There were, I'm trying to remember, I think 2 candidates that Marcus Freeman made a run at before he kind of went through the process. There were 2 guys that he flat out reached out to and said, I'd love to hire you. And they both said, no, they both were employed at other schools and it didn't work out. And then he went through the process. And of the 4 that he really looked at the most, Al Golden was preferred amongst that group. Yes. But there was a couple candidates that he really liked that were kind of, before I begin this process, if you're interested, this is going to be a much shorter process type of guys. And it's not that they weren't interested, but they were at jobs that they liked a lot. So we'll see. I heard that Jim Leonard was one of those guys, by the way, that they reached out to and said, would you have any interest? And he said no. I wonder if Jim Leonard's regretting that decision right about now. Maybe a little bit. Yeah. Maybe a little. So, yeah, that's the answer to that question. Let Manager One with the super chat. Thank you very much. Guys, do you have any insight to what conversations look like in a case like Bronte Johnson, where the staff is arguing what his best position is? It's not an argument. I don't think so. It's more so about twofold things, right? And number one is, what are our needs in the class? Well, threefold. Number one is, what position do we like him best at? That has to be discussed. Who has him graded at that position the highest? Now, of course, the offensive staff may say we like him best on offense, and but it's more so, okay, as a receiver, where is he on your board? Well, he's number 5. I'm just hypothetically making. I'm not saying he is. I'm just making an argument. Okay, and they say, okay, well, safety. What do you guys see him as? He's number 1 guy on our board. Okay, we're recruiting him as a safety. That's your internal conversation. And then there's the trump card, Bronte. What do you want to play? Hey, coach, I'm good. I'll play whatever. I'll play wherever you guys need me. Then, okay, then we really like you at safety. But if, we'll recruit you as an athlete. Or he may say, hey, look, I really want to play receiver. And that was part of the issue that hurt Khalil Barnes last year. I think Notre Dame graded him out much higher as a defensive back than as a receiver, but he was dead set on wanting to play receiver. So then after a while, they just said, okay, we're going to move on because we like Caleb Smith more at receiver, and we're going to get him. And you don't want to play DB. We have a need at DB. You don't want to fill that role. All good. No ill will, no bad feelings. It's just, but we're not going to recruit you to. And I kind of respected it. We're not going to lie to you and say, because they could have just said, hey, man, we'll take his receiver. We were going to get 5 receivers anyway. All good. Knowing you're going to move him to DB during his freshman year. Yep. They just chose to say, hey, look, this is what the kid wants to do. So respect, and then you move on. But those are the factors that go into it, Ryan.
Yeah, I think that the staff, because he is being targeted as a safety, obviously. We've talked about that.
But I think they have been open to the idea of the other side of the ball, however.
Right.
But yes, safety is where they prefer.
And I would just like to say that I think that that's a good evaluation. I do. I think Bronte fights the ball a little bit as an offensive player, but I think he has a high upside as a safety, athletically. Very high.
He doesn't catch the ball real super clean.
Just doesn't have great ball skills, man. It just doesn't. It's just not a natural catcher. I mean,
it's on film, and I saw it last year at the Irish Invasion as well. He just isn't a supernatural pass catcher. He's got the length and the speed you want as a receiver. He doesn't catch the ball real well, to be honest with you.
And that tells me to get that 6'3" frame playing safety where you can use them in so many different varieties. Because again, like a safety, if you're a really good safety, you're going to intercept 3 to 4 passes a year, most likely. That's kind of the number, right? I mean, Bronte will be able to do that stuff. It's just I don't want him consistently catching the football all the time. I want to use that length, though, and that explosiveness and the different. Like he's going to play short zone for me. He's going to play some on the roof a little bit. He's going to move around a ton if he's a safety at Notre Dame. He's got a huge upside in that department.
I know he doesn't do it a lot now, but I actually like him playing over the top. That range, I think that's obviously not, like I said, it's not where he's used a ton in high school, but the potential, like I saw it at the Irish Invasion, he's a super rangy guy that can play side to side as a deep middle safety. So I do think he has the tools, and he certainly has the body of a free safety in that type of defense because he is long and rangy. And if you ever watch him play basketball, you're like, this kid's got suddenness to him.
Yes.
He's a really good basketball player as well.
And as he fills out, man, I think that he is the perfect modern safety where he can just do a little bit of everything. I think he's got tremendous upside. Really do.
He does. I mean, because here's the thing. When he stops playing basketball full time, he's going to gad 15 pounds like that. I mean, he's going to be 200 plus. He's skinny, but he's not thin. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Right? So he's not like this really narrow, like Carson Hobbs is kind of narrow. He's filled out, he's athletic, but he's really narrow. Bronte has a narrow middle section, but he's actually got decent shoulders. He's got some width to him, right? And then you look at him like this kid's going to fill out pretty well once he stops playing basketball full time. And like I said, he's a really good basketball. I mean, if he wanted to go to college and play basketball, I don't know if it's at the Division I level, but he could. I mean, certainly at some of the schools I've been at, he could go play basketball. And he's a really good basketball player, but football's without question his best sport. in my opinion. And once he settles in on just being a football player, that's the other thing. His game is going to take off big time because he just hasn't. And I'm fine with it. I'm a multi-sport proponent, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want kids to play multi-sports. I don't need you to be a proven like ready-made product when you get to high school. I think there's a lot of merit emotionally, mentally, athletically, in a lot of different ways for kids playing multiple sports in high school. I'm always in favor of that. But you also have to live with the fact that guys like that play certain sports, basketball being one for football players, that they're going to have a little bit more of a need to fill out and do some other things because of that. Kyle Rudolph is a perfect example. Kyle Rudolph was really thin in high school and he had trouble putting weight on because then he'd put weight on and then he'd go play basketball season and the weight would come right off. Yeah. But you could just look at Kyle Rudolph in high school and say, when that kid stops playing basketball, he's going to blow up. And he did. He was 250, 260 pounds in the NFL, right? And I think Bronte's not that, but he's going to be 200 pounds when it's all said and done. He's got that really nice frame, even though he's really skinny now. But there's a lot of tools there to work with, no question about it.
There's some impressive basketball players on the safety board, by the way, man. Yes. Like Bronte, Ricardo Jones out of Georgia
he's got some hops.
He's like an 18, 19 point per game guy.
And he can shoot. Yeah, because he'll put some of his highlights up on Twitter, and you're like, this kid's got some game.
And I know Mike Matthews is obviously wants to play wide receiver, but if we count him on the safety board too, Mike Matthews is a baller, man.
I get it. Most of these kids, like Aaron, what's the kid from California? Aaron
Butler.
Aaron Butler, he's convinced himself he's a receiver. I'm like, bro, there's a lot of receivers like you. Same with Travis Hunter. There's a lot of receivers like you. A lot. There's not many corners like you. I get it. They want the ball, especially in the NIL era. The guys want I want the ball. I want everybody look at me, give me the ball. And a cornerback is doing his best, is at his best when the ball never comes his direction. Right? I get it. That's the world we live in. But I want to say to some of these kids, there's not a lot of guys on defense that look and move like you do. You could be a star there. You're a good player at receiver. You're one of many guys like you at receiver. You're a unicorn at corner. But these kids just don't get it. And that's how I feel about Bronte. Bronte could play receiver and he'd be a solid receiver, but he could be a really good safety when it's all said and done, especially once he starts playing football. And that's how I feel about Mike Matthews. Yeah, Mike Matthews would be a really good high school or college receiver, but he could be a special defensive back if he wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's still, like to your point, right? I think wide receiver wise, he's still a very good player in the 2024 class. But I think that Mike Matthews could have some argument, Brian, if you were looking at him just as a safety, as one of the top 3 or 4 players in the class. Like he's that special.
He's a top 10 player. If I knew that Mike Matthews wanted to stay on defense, he's a top 10 national player for me, easily. Yeah, easily. Yeah. As a receiver, he's a top 50 guy for me. That's just how I feel. So yeah, we'll kind of see how it goes. But good super chats there. We appreciate that. Let's see here. Justin Jordan Schreiber says, Brian, did you hear how Kevin Austin did on the practice squad this year for the Jaguars?
I have not, Jordan, but I could find that out for you. Okay. So if on the next show, if you just want to put the same question back in, I will have some intel into how Kevin did. I hope he did well. I hope so.
This is a question for you, Ryan, from Jordan. Yeah. He says, you had mentioned about Quentin. He's talking about you because I never mentioned that. Because I don't follow the NFL. You had mentioned about Quentin Nelson taking a step back and needed to get back on track for the Hall of Fame. Can you delve more into that? What's happening? Is he just league average, worst, etc.? Well, real quick, and Hall of Fame is the elite of the elite. And Ryan and I hold a very similar view of that, that you can't just be really good. You have to be elite. So saying he's not playing at a Hall of Fame level, it's not saying he's league average or worse at this point in time. I just want to make sure we're clear. But Ryan, you have said he struggled. So why don't you go ahead and answer the question?
Yeah, he struggled this year, especially. Last year he had some struggles as well. And I would say this, Jordan, the Hall of Fame conversation for me, at the end of the day, if Quentin Nelson just coasts on his name for the rest of his career and makes more and more Pro Bowls, right? Like he'll probably get any either way, right? I mean, because that would be kind of the hardware conversation. Quentin has not been as good the last 2 years. And I think that there's some conversation too, just his play needs to get a little bit more back on track. Because, I mean, his first couple years, man, he looked like he was going to be the best guard in the NFL. Like, he would have been like, him and Zach Martin are the best guards in the NFL for the next X amount of years. Like, those are the guys.
Until Zach Martin retires.
Exactly. And so Quentin got off to his fast start. I think the last couple of years, a lot of it has to do with the team not being nearly as good around him, because at the end of the day, Quentin is a guard where he had Ryan Kelly next to him. He had Anthony Costanzo next to him. He had Andrew Luck early in his career at quarterback, right? The quarterback carousel has not helped, I think, that offense in general, in my opinion. I also think that Anthony Costanzo had to retire at left tackle. They have kind of a revolving door at left tackle currently right now. And I think that sometimes what's around you can really hurt offensive linemen, that
especially
continuity.
guards and centers, yes. Because you're always tackles can play on an island to a large degree. Guards cannot. You're always dependent on what's happening next to you. 100%. Absolutely.
Yes. And I would say that I don't think it's completely Quentin Nelson's fault. I don't think it is. And I think he still has time, man. What's he, like 26? Like, he's still a young cat, man.
Right.
He has all the tools. I mean, dude is just massive, powerful, good athlete. Like, he has all those tools, right? So he can get back on track. The last 2 years have not been nearly as good as the first couple. That's just where we are right now.
And you are correct. He is 26.
Yeah.
I'll say this,
he's a
Ryan.
young rookie, right? He was a really young rookie, if I remember correctly.
Because he's his rookie year was 2018?
Yeah.
So if he was 26, 25, 24, 20, he would have been 21, 22 when
somewhere
he came
in that
out?
ballpark, yeah.
Yeah.
And he was a 4-year player too, which is Yep.
Here's what I'll say about Quentin as well.
Yep.
Quentin is a guy that likes to win and really does not like failure. And I have to think, and this is just a pure speculation on my part, but just knowing Quentin the way that I did during his time here, not personally know him, but just know of him and how he works. He's probably putting a little bit extra burden on himself too, because of what's around him is so bad. And you can't do that as a lineman. You have to be able to just do your job and do it really well. And I think there's because if you're thinking, like I was told that you mentioned, I think he got blown up a few more times this year. If you're having to think about what's next to you and you're going against a big time defensive lineman that's over 300 pounds, you're more prone to get your butt whooped. But when I can trust my center, my tackle to do their job, and my job is just kick your butt within the framework of what I know is happening, then you're going to kick butt. But when you're thinking about what's happening around you, we've talked about this like a linebacker. I think that's something that hurt J.D. Bertrand this year. I think it's why you and I have talked about why Drew White's worst year at Notre Dame was 2020, because he was constantly worried about Shane Simon doing his job. In 2019, when he had Asmar next to him, he was pretty good. 2021, when there was a little bit more kind of certainty because J.D. Bertrand was next to him, Drew could just kind of go do his job, and you saw the best version of Drew White. 2020, we did not, because I think he was worried about JD this year with Maris. I think one of the issues JD had is he always felt like he had to kind of compensate for what was next to him. Hey, is he going to do his job? I got to make sure I'm getting you lined up. And then, shoot, the ball's being snapped. So that's a big thing for some positions. At boundary receiver, yeah, you got to know what routes are being run. You're just not there winging it, but you're still kind of out there on an island. When you're a corner, you've got to know the coverage, but it's just you. This is your job. You do your job. It doesn't affect you as much when other people don't do theirs as much.
Right.
So
there are definitely more dependent positions for success, right? I mean, the quarterback, offensive line, defensive line to a degree, although you can argue that, if you get a one-on-one, that's a mano-a-mano type of thing. Linebacker, you just mentioned. I would say safety is another one where it's like, if a safety needs to trust what's in front of him, he needs to trust what's off to the side of him, he needs to trust the guy next to him, right? So I think there definitely are more dependent positions for how successful a player could be.
Yep. There's a super chat that I'm going to get to, Ryan, because I need to think about it. Go look at that super chat and see it, because it's something that needs to spend a couple seconds on that we'll get to here in a minute. Just thinking about who that might be. Rob Osgood with a question. Guys, in your opinion, what is the timeline on Notre Dame picking a new OC? I would imagine that you're going to see Coach Freeman in the next couple of days start to zero in on a few candidates, 3 to 4 guys to bring in for interviews. I think that what this last few days has been about, Ryan, is just looking at, okay, who are we processing? Who are we looking at? Who has interest? Hey, I really like this guy, but as I talk to him, I realize it's just not a fit. Hey, I really like this guy. You talk to him. Hey, I think this might be something. And he says, hey, by the way, I want to bring in my own offensive line, running backs, and receivers coach. All right, hey, man, best of luck to you wherever you are. I mean, so there's all that process that goes through this. Sometimes you may say, hey, I love this guy as a coach, but that system, and this is my issue with Sean Lewis, right, from Kent State. He comes from the Dino Babers school. It's a pure spread. The guy's got the more film I watch, I'm like, boy, this guy's really smart. Bad fit at Notre Dame. You'd have to completely overhaul what you've recruited and what you're doing now as an offensive staff to play to him. I don't know how well what Harry Hiestand does fits with Sean Lewis. So if there's somebody at Notre Dame pushing for Sean Lewis, it's probably not a good idea, right? Because the fit's not there. That guy's a really good offensive mind, and I think it's a home run hire for Colorado. I don't know if it's the same home run for Notre Dame because of the fit, and those are things that all are part of the process. And so I think they're kind of getting through that, if they're not already through that. And I think now you're going to start seeing Coach Freeman say, okay, let's see who we're going to bring in now. So I would imagine, I'll be shocked, Ryan, if we don't at least know who it is in the next 2 weeks at the latest. Now, it may not be announced by then because we all know Notre Dame's process takes some time. But we'll know who that's going to be within the next week to 2 weeks would be my guess based on things that I'm hearing. And I think we'll start to hear some names being kind of thrown around, maybe this weekend, depending on, who has the loosest lips in the Goog. And there's a lot of people with loose lips at the Goog that just like to be sources. So, hey, which, doesn't hurt me, but sometimes you just wish, like, guys, just shut it. But I think we'll start to hear some stuff here pretty soon. Let's go to the next one here, Ryan, from Rob Osgood. Guys, in your opinion, with the 24 class, with the mass offers going out, first of all, it's not a mass offers. They have not offered that many guys. To say that, but it is a lot more than normal. Do you think Notre Dame is going to attack early like last year, or do you think they will save a few spots towards the end? It's a good one, Ryan.
I think they're definitely going to be more deliberate towards players making the process, like working the process, right? Taking those visits. Don't commit until you're 100%, man. Like that's where it comes down to, right? I mean, we've heard about the official visit, restrictions that Notre Dame has, but I think that this year, especially, you're going to see guys that, I'm sure that there's going to be a couple guys that, maybe want to go public, but Notre Dame's going to have a truthful conversation of like, awesome, we'll love to have you, but make sure you're ready. Make sure you're done with this process. I think
we've already seen that. We know of a couple guys that silently committed that wanted to go public, but the staff was like, "You still want to take visits?" Yes, I do.
Make sure you're
then
done.
No, we're not taking your commitment until you do that. So I think that's one of the people asked about the lessons that they've learned. I think that's the lessons that I think that this staff has learned, in my opinion, based on how things went last year. So. And also, again, right now, it is not guaranteed to be as big of a class as last year. Or at least, because, again, people say, well, they only got 24 this year. Yeah, I get that, but they wanted more. They attacked the class with the thought of 26, 27, maybe even 28, and obviously fell short of that, which allowed them to take in a few more transfers than maybe they otherwise would have.
Yep.
So I think this class is looking to be under 25 as of now. That may change, but you have to go about it early a little bit different. I also think that this right here is my opinion. This is not something I've been told. I think the fact that at some positions it's not a great class on what is known. It's not forcing them. They're choosing to say, let's not push for this guy. There's some safeties, for example, that were ranked as, like 4-star guys that Notre Dame could already have in the class right now, but they're just solid players. And the staff's like, no, we don't want to take those guys right now. Let's keep looking. Let's keep searching, and that's led them to some offers that, to Melo Jones, for example, right? So I think they're choosing not to take commitments from guys that they know they can get right now because they're just not view those guys right now as, okay, this guy's not moving the needle right now, and we want to get some guys with some really high ceilings. So I think in a couple positions there's that as well, Ryan, which is a reason why you're seeing some offers go out. And in other instances, there's also a game involved in it, Rob, and that is we have a guy that's a silent commit or is close to committing that wants to let the process play out. So we're going to let him know that's fine, but we're not waiting around for you. And if you want to be in this class, you better step up and get it over with sooner rather than later. Otherwise, you may find yourself without a spot. And then sometimes that's playing the game, and other times that's legitimate because you're not good enough to hold down a spot if you're not already in the class. So there's a lot of different reasons for it.
I think you're also, it's a big evaluation period too happening right now, right? Like leading into the spring and summer visits and into the senior year, like you're still evaluating a lot of different players. And I think that, there's an offensive lineman in particular that we know for sure Notre Dame could have had if they wanted to, right? But he ends up at a different school because Notre Dame did not quite have him to that level of a degree, even though the
You can
recruiting
go ahead and say
services.
who it is. I don't think that's anything of a secret.
All right. Yeah, I just didn't want to throw shade at Ian Moore, but like Ian
The
Moore's
kid's
an
going to
in-state
Ohio
kid.
State. He's good, right?
player.
And it's not that Notre Dame thought he sucked. It's just in his year, we're going to have a smaller class. He just doesn't fit what we're looking for at this point in time.
There's just other guys on the board that they are a little bit higher on than Ian Moore. And I tell you, I mean, I've talked to Ian Moore a bunch, obviously, when Notre Dame was recruiting him a little bit, when he went on campus, all that type of stuff. Ian Moore loved Notre Dame. If they would have offered him and he would have been a take, I think he would be in the class right now. It's just my opinion, right? But they weren't incredibly high on him, and Ohio State was. So he ends up at Ohio State, and I mean, there's no shame in being a top 100 player at Ohio State, right? It's pretty dang good. Right. So, yeah.
And it's not that far from home, right?
Exactly.
So that's all good. It's not that far from home. It's not like he had to go really far away or take a step down. He's going to Ohio State. He'll be all right. Yep. He'll be all right. But yeah, that's kind of how those things go. But that's a good example, Ryan. It's not that Notre Dame think he's a good football player. They recruited him. He's a good football player. It's just it came down to and the reason they didn't offer him is because they knew he'd commit, or at least felt strongly he would commit, and that's why they had to choose to go in a different direction. So I'm going to bring the super chat up now.
Okay.
Because I think I've had a chance to look at it a little bit. Tyler Evans says the most overrated number one recruit coming out of high school since 2000. And good, right?
One of the first guys that I found, and I haven't gotten through every single year, but Ronald Powell's one that popped up for me, 2010 for 247. Very talented player, but obviously he never had the career at Florida that he was projected to have. So that was one quick guy. Because, I mean, honestly, the number one players from at least the years that I've looked at so far weren't too bad. I mean, I saw Jadeveon Clowney, I saw Joe McKnight. Like, there were some
what resource? Because first of all, okay,
I was on 247.
Of the composite, is it the overall? Is it one service? Whatever the case may be, it just depends.
Yeah.
For example, if we're just going to look at one service, the most overrated number one recruit I've ever seen is Antonio. It was recently. It was Antonio Alfano, the kid from Jersey that 247 had to rank number one, but he wasn't number one on their composite list. And so the thing for me, the way I look at it is I don't, if you're a bust, but I didn't think you were, I had a buddy of mine. Here's an example. Buddy of mine and I were talking yesterday.
Yeah.
And he was getting on the staff for not offering the Nick Herbig kid out of Hawaii in 2020. They took his teammate, Jordan Patelho. And he was like, they should. I said, you never said that to me in 2020. You never mentioned that they made a mistake. They should have gone out. You never mentioned that to me. Not one time. You said you liked the pickup for Wisconsin, but you never said Notre Dame made a mistake by not going after that kid. So you can't come back and tell me now that they made a mistake because they made the same mistake you did. Number one. I said, number two, Nick Herbig is not Nick Herbig if he'd come to Notre Dame because he'd be sitting behind Isaiah Foskey his entire career. So he wouldn't be who he is. He'd be a lot like what Jordan Patelho is, a guy that's flashed in a limited role and that you're excited about being the number one guy now. Right now, they have a little bit off the field, it's a little bit different. So I try to look at it. It's if I felt that about you at the time, not so much that you busted later. And so that's kind of the way that I personally looked at it. And there's a couple guys to me that fit that mold, at least over the last 15 years. 2015, and I'm going off the composite list. 2015, Trenton Thompson was ranked as the number one player. I thought he was vastly overrated. I thought he was a good top 100 player. He ended up being a solid player at Georgia, but was never anything special. I think he went undrafted. That didn't surprise me. I thought he was very, very overrated coming out of high school. I mentioned the Antonio Alfano kid who was ranked that high from 247 Sports. Another guys that I thought were a little bit overrated coming out of high school that were number ones is recently in 2021. I thought that Quinn Ewers was not the number one player in his class, and then they reclassified him and still had him as the number one player. Ryan, you know this. I've always said this. Quinn Ewers is a good talent, but they make way more out of him than they should have. Way more out of him than they should have. And he was never this generational, like he throws it really well at combines and camps, but he was never an elite football player. And that's a little bit what's going on with Dylan Raiola, to be completely honest with you. Dylan Raiola has really ridiculous physical talent. He's not an elite quarterback right now. He's not. He's a good one, but he's not a great quarterback right now on the same level that some other people are. So, and that's how Quinn Ewers is. And honestly, a lot of my overrateds are that kind of guy. Matt Barkley in 08, I thought was a talented quarterback on a great high school team. Never thought he was the number one player in that class. I never thought he was wow, this is a generation. And if you're going to be the number one ranked recruit, you need to be pretty flippin' special. So those are some of the ones for me, Ryan, that in my time of covering recruiting, I'm trying to keep it more so to when like I covered recruiting. Ronald Powell being an interesting one. I thought Ronald Powell was a top 25 player, though. You know, he was pretty good. He had some attitude issues.
Yeah.
That was more his issue than anything else. So
I can never personally say anything bad about Antonio Alfano, who's a former Notre Dame, former New Jersey player.
You got it. Yeah. Your static picked up. So it just kicked in. So yeah, Antonio Alfano, that's an interesting one. I'll give Ryan a chance to speak to that one when he gets back. But that was one that is a prime example of the Alabama overrating. Now I don't know what I'm going to look at what his composite was here real quick. I'm not quite sure what his composite ranking was and what everybody else thought he was. I don't think anyone else thought as highly of him. But I'm going to look at his overall ranking. I know On3 had him as the number one, or 247 had him as the number one player in the country. And I'm trying to see what everybody else had him as. Give me 1 second. Rivals had him. Where did Rivals have him coming out? Let's see here. They had him ranked number 5 overall. And then ESPN had him ranked number 28. I thought he was a borderline top 100 player. And he was a guy that I thought was super, super overrated. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that he picked Alabama. I really think that's where it came from. So, let me look at this ranking history here real quick of him, and because this will tell us a lot. So when did he commit to Alabama? He committed to Alabama on May of 2018. So let's go down here. In May of 2018, he was ranked as the number 124 player in the country. Antonio Alfano was by Rivals. He was 117 before, and then he comes out his senior year and miraculously jumps all the way up to the number 5 overall player in the country. What changed? Committed to Alabama. That's literally all that changed, was that right there. The rest of it didn't really change. I'm going to go see what his ranking history was at for 247. When he committed to Alabama, he was ranked as the number 45 player in the country, and he stayed 45 until the season started. Then all of a sudden in November, he jumps up to number 8 and then jumps up to number 1. Based on what? I can assure you from looking at his film, it didn't get any different than what it was before. He was never that good. He jumped up because he went to Bama. And now he is just not playing. I mean, he got kicked out of Alabama pretty early. He then got kicked out of Colorado. He's been a mess. He's really been a mess. So, when Jaden Osbury committed Notre Dame, he was like a top 30 player. When Drake Bowen committed Notre Dame, he was a top 30 player. But remember at the time, Drake Bowen wasn't leaning towards Notre Dame early. A lot of people thought he was going to go to maybe Clemson or Auburn or Alabama if Alabama offered. And then he commits to Notre Dame and ranking goes down, despite him being a better football player as a senior. Jaden Osbury is another example. His ranking plummeted right after he committed Notre Dame. I think On3 dropped him 100 spots in the very next ranking, if I remember correctly. Based on what? Over the summer. Remember that? He went to that event in Florida, and everyone that I read, like, oh, number 1 linebacker at this event, and then next ranking, 100 spots lower because he just committed Notre Dame. So, yeah, that's how I view that one, Ryan. So those are some of those guys. But Antonio Alfano, to me, is the worst of all of them. But that was just 247 alone had him that high at number 1. I'd probably say Trenton Thompson and Quinn Ewers are probably the 2 most. Matt Barkley's in that conversation for me as well. Did you ever see Matt Barkley in high school, Ryan?
Modern day. Yeah.
He was a good player. He just was a part of a really good program. That's really what it boiled down to.
That was a great program.
So, yeah, like people say, well, he's a bust in college. No, I think that's exactly what he should have been in college. He had some
really good moments in college.
Right, he did. He put up some good numbers there. You made the mistake, not Matt Barkley. So don't punish Matt Barkley because you made a bad evaluation. Matt Barkley, to me, was a good college quarterback for what his talent level was. He was a 4th-round draft pick, threw for over 3,000 yards a couple times, threw 39 touchdowns, 36 touchdowns, but he could never live up to that number 1 overall player ranking. Same thing with Jimmy Clausen, right? Like Jimmy just could never live up to that ranking. Different reasons, But I think that's kind of how I look at some of that stuff, Ryan. Just my 2 cents. Good question.
I was just going to say before my audio did not cooperate that I could never say anything negative about Antonio Alfano, former New Jersey great. So,
I mean, you got to at least be honest enough.
Oh no, he was
even
bad.
with a Jersey guy to say that's a bad ranking.
I don't even know if I could ever even say he's bad. I never saw him play on the college level. Like such.
Well, I'm
so
just saying,
self-sabotage.
did you think he should have been a number one top 10 player?
I didn't really watch him. I don't know. Yeah,
that's my thing.
Really watch him
sometimes guys don't pan out, but man, they were great high school players. Like I've said this, Ronald Curry did not pan out, but Ronald Curry is still the best high school quarterback I've ever seen.
Yeah,
in on film or in person, and I'm talking from Jimmy Clausen on is when I started really watching film. So, like from seeing him in high school with my own eyes, and then just kind of going through this. I mean, look, why did people not know who Michael Vick was? Because they were in the same league, and it wasn't even close. Wasn't even close. Go ask anyone that watched him play against Deep Creek and Deion Dyer in the playoffs, and they'll tell you that. I watched him with my own eyes. I'm in the stadium watching him play in the playoffs against Deep Creek. He had 3 passing touchdowns, a rushing touchdown, a pick 6 for a touchdown, and a punt return for a touchdown. Like, he was insane. He was insane. Now, I never saw Allen Iverson in high school other than just some brief clips here and there.
Yeah.
But he's still, to this day, the best high school quarterback I've ever seen. And if he wouldn't have tried to play basketball and would have gone somewhere other than North Carolina, I think he'd have been a very, very, very high NFL draft pick, in my opinion. I really do.
Allen Iverson was silly, man. Like the highlights I've seen of him play, he had I think his senior year, he was like the all-state quarterback, and he had 9 interceptions on defense or something.
He was unreal. He was unreal.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one. Anthony Bell says, "I'm going to take this one on just because it's a unique, and you get credit for being unique, Anthony. If tomorrow IB became a tabloid magazine, we aren't and never will be, but we'll grant the premise." And you had to come up with the absolute juiciest rumor for the Notre Dame offensive coordinator opening, no matter how far-fetched, what would you come up with? For me, I think this one's kind of easy. If we were a tabloid and all we cared about was clicks and creating driving traffic, no matter how absurd, and driving eyes to because again, that's what a tabloid is to me. This is an easy one for me, Ryan. It's Brady Quinn. I'm selling the heck out of. I'm hearing that Brady Quinn's going to be the candidate, and every time he'd come out and say he'd deny it, I say, yeah, he's just saying that publicly because he's in their Fox contract and he can't really actually say that. But trust me, I've talked to some people. He's interested. Like I would be now. This is all false, 100% false. This isn't reality. Before someone runs like Driscoll said that Brady Quinn's going to be the coach at Notre Dame. He has contacts. That's not what I'm saying. I'm making this up. If we were like the, what's the one that you see at the grocery stores? What's it called?
National Enquirer?
Bingo.
Yeah.
I would be selling the heck out of Brady Quinn to Notre Dame rumors if we were a tabloid.
Notre Dame fans would be losing their minds, man.
I couldn't think of a juicier rumor to start than that one. I really couldn't. What would yours be? What would yours be, Ryan?
That's a good one. I didn't even think about Brady Quinn. I was thinking something stupidly doesn't make any sense. Like Jim Harbaugh is going to be the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame.
He said no matter how far-fetched. If just trying to think of one that you could even somewhat believe is plausible, that would be it for me. If I decided not to do that one because I was afraid that Brady Quinn might come into South Bend, which he does often, and kind of ball me into a pretzel and beat the crap out of me for making that rumor, I'd go Jimmy Clausen.
Oh, it'd be another funny one, and but the national media would eat this one up. Not so much Notre Dame fans. Chris Sims, offensive coordinator, Notre Dame.
Sorry,
could you imagine?
Excuse me, I haven't been feeling well today. That's what that involuntary.
He only recruits left-handed quarterbacks, and yeah.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that would be interesting. But yeah, if I was going to turn into a tabloid and just start making stuff up, Brady Quinn would be the one that I would go with.
Yeah.
Yep. That would, or somebody just said this one. This would be an interesting one from Sparky2519. Urban Meyer.
Yeah,
that would be quite the rumor. Yeah. That would be quite the rumor. Yeah.
Someone said Andy Reid is coaching the Super Bowl right now. That's fantastic.
Here's one from Michael Hughes. Driscoll just said he wants Jeff Quinn as OC. Now, see, here's the thing. If I started leaking that in a tabloid fashion, people would eat that up because they would know that I'm not doing that, pushing my own agenda.
Right.
Or at least they would think that, hey, he hates Jeff Quinn. I don't hate Jeff Quinn. I actually respect Jeff Quinn quite a bit as a human being. I just think he's a terrible football coach. But if I really wanted to drive clicks, Brady Quinn's number one. But if I was afraid of Brady Quinn beating me up for spreading that rumor, Jeff Quinn might be a good number two because people would eat that up because they would think there's no way Driscoll makes that up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's no way he makes it up for how hard he was on Jeff Quinn. That would, to your point, that would make Notre Dame fans lose their minds in a bad way, but it would make a lot of money. There's no doubt about that.
Sure would.
Sadly, that crap sells. That's why there is that. Like I look at like Popper, I'm like, why do these people do what they do? Because people are willing to pay a lot of money for them to be that kind of scumbag person that follows celebrities around and takes pictures inappropriately and does all that. I mean, there's money in that.
Yep.
You know, sadly, because people care. I still don't understand why people care about what famous people think. Like I care about Chris Evans for how he does as an actor. I don't give a rip what he thinks about anything else.
Yeah.
I just don't care. I just, I'll say this, there's very few actors who I listen to them when they speak about things other than their job, right? Like Denzel, have you ever listened to Denzel talk about culture or like he's
Absolutely
really
not.
sharp,
Yeah.
really sharp. He's one of the few that I'm like, dude, this guy's making some sense on some stuff. Most I don't. Morgan Freeman's had some stuff that I'm like, dude, that guy's speaking some common sense here. But for the vast majority of them, and it's not just people that don't agree with me politically, it's people that agree with me politically. Like when Kanye West started talking about politics and everybody's like, oh, we love Kanye. I'm like, give it a minute. Give it a minute. Like, why do I care what Kanye West thinks about a political topic that I have an interest in?
Poor
right?
Kanye.
If he's not talking about rapping or something like that, I just don't care. Same with athletes, right? Which is why we don't talk politics. Nobody in this chat cares what I think about politics, right? So, I've never understood that. But there's a money in it. That's why people do it, man. And that's why you have that kind of stuff. But if I was going to be that kind of group, Brady Quinn would be the first one. Milton fan says, Brian, can you do that voice again? No. I'm not going to do that again.
Milton fan, were you on the show yesterday? Brian said you had to pay him a lot more than $2.
Right. I gave you a freebie on that one since it wasn't a real one, and I was mocking. He offered $2. Like, I'm going to do that for $2. Come on, Milton fan. Give me a break, man. You got to give me a little more credit than that.
Brian's not a cheap date, man. Come on.
Yes. And here's one. This just in. EJ Holland has been offered the Notre Dame OC position. Talk about finding the least qualified person on the planet.
That does sound like something that EJ Holland would actually spread, though.
Yeah. Very true. Very, very, very true. Very true. All right, let's get to the next one before this goes too far off the rails. Tyler Ehrig says, what is the go-to stress eating or drinking option during a game?
I don't really eat that much or drink that much during a game. Now that I think about
nachos
really
is kind of mine. I don't really stress eat or drink. When I'm stressed, I can't eat. Like I just can't eat. But I would say like my nervous tick is nachos. I'll have either nachos and cheese. I'll make around halftime, but then I just kind of nibble on nachos with salsa throughout the game.
I mean, I like when we have people over for games and like we'll do like pizza and wings and stuff like that. Like that works for me, like that works. But
Angela makes a really good bean burrito. I mean, a bean dip for games. So we're actually gonna have like a little fun, just she and I kind of a little Super Bowl party, make some fun snacks.
Nice.
She makes a really good bean dip. I'd never had it before. And I didn't think I was gonna like it, but she made it one time for my players.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's probably not a good thing to make for them for the game, but they loved it. And so I was like, well, I'll try it. I was like, man, this is really good. But those are usually my go-tos. But it's not, I don't do it as a stress related thing. I do it.
Yeah.
So,
and I do not drink alcohol typically during games, believe it or not. I know people like put like scotch in there. Like I feel like I'm like, have you ever seen Braveheart, Brian?
Mm-hmm.
Where William Wallace is like, I need my wits. Like I need my wits while I watch games, man. I can't dilute it.
Sure. That's my favorite part is people who drink during games and then want to argue after the game about something that they saw during. I'm like, dude, you were seeing triple at the time. I don't want to hear your opinion on that.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Let's get to some more here questions. David Lowe, I've heard people talking about the OC at Colorado. I think his name is Sean Lewis, and him running air raid. Would y'all like to see that offense in their name, especially with how talented our backs are? He's not. I don't view him as an air raid coach, Ryan. I view him as more of
he's a college spread.
Yeah, I mean, I get where they say air raid because he comes from Dino, but Dino's not I wouldn't call Dino an air raid guy either. Now, their lineage can be traced back to air raid-ish principles. I mean, Art Briles is kind of an air raid guy, but not really. It's more of a college spread is kind of how I would say him. But no, I wouldn't want to see that off. Now, look, could that offense work in time? Maybe. But I just don't think you're maximizing your tight ends, your offensive line, and your running backs the way that you can running that kind of offense. I don't.
When you're running like a spread or an air raid, because I'll kind of put them together for a second. Why did Mike Leach become the big air raid guys? Because he could recruit wide receivers and get decent enough quarterbacks, but his offensive line wasn't very good. That's why the splits were always so massive, right? Like, I think that for me, that doesn't parlay into what Notre Dame has structurally as an offense. Like, your offensive line is your best part. Why would I want to take that downhill style away from them? Why would I want to sacrifice my running backs getting downhill? Like, Audric Estime in a college spread or air raid, for what reason? Like, you're just basically taking one of your best offensive players and making him obsolete in the offense that you're running. So yeah, no, I that's not the bag. I want to see diversity in an offense, right? Like, I want to be able to do multiple things, but I don't want to see Audric Estime in a spread or an air raid. Like, it's just not what I want to see. I don't even want to see Logan Diggs in a spread and air raid. Like, he could do it more than Estime, but like, I don't want to see that either. I just don't.
Right. It's harder to win up front all the time in my opinion. It is. You're winning because of what you have on the perimeter and at quarterback. And I think it almost his offense to me seems to borderline require a quarterback that can run. And I don't necessarily want that. If you have that, great. I don't want to have that for your offense to be successful, in my opinion. Broke Neck Boy, would the 2012-13 Georgia team beat Notre Dame the same way Bama if they won the SEC title game? I don't think so. They didn't match. Look, first of all, that Notre Dame Bama, that was a bad day. Alabama was the better team. That was a bad day. Yep. Notre Dame had a bad game. It happens. If TCU and Georgia play again a week later, it's not 65-7. Georgia still win? Yeah, probably still win comfortably, but it's not 65-7. That's the thing that's, it was a bad day. The 2012 Georgia team, that was Aaron Murray at quarterback. That was a very good team. Almost beat Bama. Had that ball that got tipped at the end of the game.
And then the receiver caught it. I'm like, why did you catch it? Just knock it to the ground. You're not in the end zone.
So it was a very good team, but Notre Dame would have matched up a lot better against that team than the Alabama team. Because the reason is Alabama was great at what Notre Dame was also great at. And because Notre Dame was off their game that day, Alabama ripped them up. I mean, that's just what it boils down to. So I think it would have been, would they have won? I don't know. But it would have been a much more competitive game. And there was also a lot of stuff going on with the Manti stuff was starting to break. The players were starting to find out about it, and they were a distracted team. Yeah, they were a very distracted team. You need to find out the roster of who that Georgia team in 2012.
Yeah, I want to look that.
You're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, they had Aaron Murray was their quarterback. Their leading Todd Gurley and Keith Marshall were their two running backs. They were pretty good. Yes. Receiving core, they had Tavares King, Malcolm Mitchell, Marlon Brown. I don't know if you remember him. They had Arthur Lynch at tight end. Defensively, Alec Ogletree was on that team. Sean Williams, Jarvis Jones, Bakari Rambo. Garrison Smith was a really highly ranked guy. Damian Swan, Michael Gilliard, John Jenkins, Christian Robertson. Those were some of the guys on that team. So it's a very good team.
John Jenkins was like the 360-pound nose tackle, right? That was Jenkins, I think.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
I believe so. Yeah, that was a very good Bama team. I mean, South Carolina. And look, and they lost, 32-28, going in for the game-winning score. That team lost at South Carolina that year 35-7.
Yep.
Right? They had a bad day. It happens, right? Yep. It happens. If they play again, that probably doesn't happen, right? So it is kind of I'm not gonna lie, I enjoyed when Steve Spurrier was at South Carolina. I did. It was just nice seeing another non-traditional SEC team do really well. That was fun to see.
For sure.
Let's work through as many as we can, Ryan, because I know we got to wrap up here really soon. Here's a draft one for you from John A1. Which player projected to be a day 2 or 3 pick would you predict to be an impact player on the next level? I say, how about this, Ryan?
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming your answer is no one.
Wait, what? Oh, are we just talking about? Well, I was going to ask if we're talking about Notre Dame specific, or am I talking about over encompassing drafts?
It's a good question. He could let's so if it's Notre Dame, it's no one. So let's go a different angle. It's anyone that you think may be a day or 2-3 pick that you think could go to the next level and be and try not to avoid a guy that's picked 34th. But maybe go like if you're not in the top 40 or 50, a guy that could maybe go out and be that guy at the next level.
Yeah, I mean, I love these types of questions because honestly, you could all honestly, John, you could list the position for me, and I'd be like, that's a guy I like in the day 2, day 3 range. I think a guy though for me that one that like popped out instantly that we actually talked about yesterday a little bit, Brian. I think Deuce Vaughn is not going to get picked super high because he's an outlier from a size perspective. I mean, he's going to be 5'5", 5'6", 180-pound running back, but I think my guy is going to be a really, really good secondary option out of a backfield, working in the passing game, returning punts, maybe even a little bit, being kind of that change of pace back in the backfield. I think Deuce Vaughn's a guy that like I look at him just like that dude could be very good in that role, like a very good football player. I think defensive end is also a position that is like incredibly deep this year. I don't think that the high level talent is incredible after Will Anderson or a Miles Murphy, but I think when you're working into like the day 2, day 3 conversation, you're going to be talking about guys like Derek Hall from Auburn, who I still really like, even though I don't think he had a great Senior Bowl, but he's a really strong power converter, has really violent hands. He's a guy that's probably going to go more in the 3rd to 4th round ballpark, but he's a guy that I really like a ton. But Deuce Vaughn is the number one. I'm just like, that guy's not going to get drafted high because he does not fit the profile of an NFL running back, but that kid's dynamic player in space.
Yeah. Real quick question down here from Anthony Scalia. He says, actually, is it Scalia or Scalia? Says, do you think Justin Scott is really interested in Notre Dame? Absolutely.
No doubt.
Absolutely. He's very interested in Notre Dame. No question. Here's one, Ryan, from Shamrock Sean. Also, what is the weakest group or rooms from a depth chart for 2023 for Notre Dame? I would say, I don't want to say weakest because I don't think Notre Dame is, I think they're top 10. They don't have a weak position. What are the questions? I'll say this. What are the rooms that I'm most concerned about?
Yeah.
Or I would say have the biggest question marks? For me, it's linebacker on defense and safety on defense, and then tight end on offense, just because of the injuries at tight end. Eli Raridon's coming back from an injury. You've got Mitchell Evans is ready to step up. What's he going to be? You got Holden States. But then after that, it's some guys have been dealing. Bauman's got an injury issue. Eli Raridon's got an injury issue. So the combination of you've got some big shoes to fill plus the injuries. If everybody's healthy, I'm not worried about tight end. So again, it's not that it's a weakness. It's just a question mark. Are they going to be healthy? Yep. Are they going to be able to kind of step up and be difference makers or just kind of role players? I'd say that's the biggest question mark I have there. And then safety and linebacker are my 2 options there. I would say right now, I think the talent at linebacker is better, but I have questions about its development and who will play.
Yeah. I agree 100% on tight ends. I think that it's the injuries, right? The injuries, and then can Mitchell Evans be the guy, right? I think he could be a very good player in that room, but can he be the guy? But I think interior defensive line is one for me, Brian, that, I mean, I just think if Riley Mills is a really good player inside, then my opinion will change a little bit. I just need to see what impact he could have on the interior because I just don't think there's a ton of proven depth on the interior defensive line right now. I think Gabriel Rubio could be a good player. Sure. I know that Howard Cross in a situational role could be a good player, but I just think that you're missing out on depth, especially at nose tackle inside. And I think that worries me a little bit. And you talk about the development of linebacker. I also have some questions about development at the defensive line position as well. So edges, I'm pretty excited about the Viper position. I'm excited about Javonte John Baptiste to be in the room. I think that the defensive end position will be good. And
Javonte means Nana can stay as a backup,
exactly.
And that's where he needs to be. Nathan Milton, formerly known as Milton Fan 15, says, love the picks with your kids in it too, man. I love that stuff. Any 24 recruits on the board, you have high level of confidence that Notre Dame gets a commitment from. I mean, Bryce Young is one.
Yes.
I think that's certainly one.
Yeah.
I think Gearby Lambert is still one that I have a relatively high confidence on. But again, the longer it goes off, it's still very early. But if it drags out too long, then you get a little bit nervous. I think those are the first 2 that kind of pop, kind of come off to me as one I feel the highest confidence in right now. If I had to pick two.
Yeah. One guy that popped in my mind, but again, it's kind of more of a wait and see, just the transition period that's happening right now, is Peyton Pierce. I still like Notre Dame's chances a lot with
I would have said that
Pierce.
2 weeks ago. Yeah, not now. Bronte Johnson, if everything clears through the admissions process, that's one I feel very good about as well. I feel Notre Dame's in a great position with Bronte at this point.
Bronte's a really good one. Yeah.
Nick McGrail with the question, Ryan, what teams do you see as a good – actually, we kind of already asked that one, so I apologize, Nick. We did answer that one, a similar version of that earlier. Here's a quick one from Archer. Is Notre Dame looking at a second tight end for 24? Are they just sticking with Larson given the current numbers in the room? Definitely looking for a second tight end in next year's class.
Because
the transfer of Kane Barong made that – yeah. Sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say we already talked about the injuries, and then I was going to mention Kane Barong obviously being out of the room. So
that they have Jack Larson. That second one. Yeah,
exactly. They have Jack Larson. They really love Jack Larson, but they have a three-man tight end group right now that they're trying to get in with. Obviously, the Carter Nelson out of Nebraska, Walter Matthews out of Georgia, and Jaden Riddell out of Missouri. So Notre Dame is definitely in the definitely in the market for a second tight end in the class.
Yeah. Let's get to a couple more here real quick as we get out of here, Ryan. Jared Rhodes with what seems to be elite recruiters at position coaches on offense. How important is the OC's ability to recruit? If Marcus Freeman and position coaches leave a big impression, what does OC really matter? It matters a ton because number one, he's got to be the closer, Ryan. That's really what it comes down to. You've got to be involved. There's got to be a relationship there. You got to be able to sell your vision for how that kid fits into what you do. Do you need to be the grinder that's every single day calling these kids? No, you don't. You can be the guy that comes in and sells your vision and closes. That's perfectly fine. He doesn't have to be a grinder, especially if he's successful. If it's a guy with a big reputation that can work, like Joe Brady doesn't, if he were just hypothetically, if he were the guy, he doesn't need to be a daily grinder because he's just going to be in Zoom meetings with that big national championship ring just like that and remind people about the numbers his team put up in 2019. And, it sells. And then if you continue a product somewhat and remotely similar to Notre Dame, it sells. So as long as the product is big time, you just have to be able to sit down with each kid and sort of develop some level of, hey, I know that guy knows me, he likes me, and this is how he sees me fitting into the system. That's really all you need to do, and then help close. So to your point, Jared, it matters that a lot in that regard. Do they have to be the individual grinders? It depends. Are you coaching a position? You better be pretty flipping good at recruiting your position. And that's the issue we're seeing with Al Golden. Al Golden doesn't need to be involved with every single kid the way Marcus Freeman was. That's just who Marcus Freeman is. But you got to be involved with more kids, and you better be able to recruit your position.
Especially linebackers, yeah.
Right,
I was going to say linebackers, like you should hear his name with every single person. I shouldn't be hearing James Laurinaitis' name more than Al Golden's from linebacker recruiting. I mean, that's part of the job, man. It's part of the job. And then you have to be the closer for other positions, right? It's like the Jaden Osbury thing last year. I felt like he was the closer for Jaden Osbury when I'm like, shouldn't he be the leadoff man for Jaden Osbury? Yeah.
Right. Let's get to this last couple. We got three more real fast. We're going to get to one here. Archer says there's starting to be a little smoke around Ohio State and Julian Sand. Which offense do you think he is better fit in, Ohio State's or Tommy Rees's? I don't think he's a great fit in either, but I'd probably say Ohio State. Yeah, agree. Quick game, get the ball out quickly, RPO, stuff like that.
A little more spread disciplines in the offense. Yeah, for sure.
Agree. And I wonder if that's maybe why he's not looking, because Tommy Rees passed on him once, and now he's going to play for him. So they've already had a tight end decommitment. Did you see that? A kid that Notre Dame offered.
Martavius Collins,
That was interesting. Archer asked a draft question, Ryan. If Carolina doesn't land a top 2 quarterback in the draft, would Derek Carr be a good option for 2023?
Depends what you have to give up for him, man. Like, that's what it comes down to.
I think what I read today that it's a third-round pick right now is basically the asking price for that.
That's fine. That's fine then. Because, I mean, honestly, I think of it as like, what's the compensation for the same position, right? So if I'm giving up a third-round pick for Derek Carr, is there a guarantee that I'm going to get a third-round quarterback that's better than Derek Carr? Like, I don't think that it is, right? So if that's the bridge, makes a little sense to me, Archer. It does. If I have to give up a first or second rounder, though, like, count me out. Like, nah, I'm good, man. I'd rather just run it back with Sam Darnold for another year and stink and get a high pick next year, Like, that's just kind of my thought process.
Agree. Here we go. Somebody, Tyler asked real quick. He says, I wanted to ask this yesterday and couldn't make the show. Who's a former player that you would like to see come in as a GA or analyst and that could have an impact? I mean, it's an easy one. It'll probably never happen, but it's an easy one for me. It's Manti. I'd love to see Manti come back. That'd be my perfect one, but I don't think it's going to happen. Last question, Ryan, here is a good one to end this one right here is from USMA 87. What are your Super Bowl picks?
I live right outside of Philadelphia, and I dislike the Philadelphia Eagles, but I have to pick the Eagles, man. I just
Because you want to stay married? Is that
no,
pretty
not
much
not
why?
not that,
Okay.
because it won't affect my marriage at all. I
Okay. Your
just
wife doesn't care if you pick against them? Okay. Because she's an
I,
Eagles fan, right?
yes,
Okay.
I would love to pick Patrick Mahomes because he is the best in the game, in my opinion, right now. But I look at the Eagles roster, I look at the Chiefs roster, I'm just like, the Eagles are just a better team, man. Like, they just are. So if the game becomes a back and forth one where the final possession wins the game, give me the Chiefs in that one. But I
Sure.
think that the Eagles do have a chance to win this game like
So
31
you're
to
basically John
21.
Elwaying it, basically.
Yep,
Whereas, the Broncos were never in those Super Bowls, but you always felt like if they were able to stay in those games and he
get
gets
a
the ball
shot,
last, then they've got a shot to win. And I
100%.
kind of felt like the Bengals game. Like the Bengals, to me, are the better team, but the problem is that you gave Patrick Mahomes a chance at the end of the game to win it, and he won it. And, Elway doesn't lose those very much, and Mahomes isn't either. I couldn't tell you what the matchups are, Ryan. I watch the playoffs and that's it. I don't study
Yeah.
the teams. I don't know the matchups. I'm not making a prediction. I'll just tell you I'm rooting for the Chiefs. I know that says a
I
lot
will be
because I'm a
rooting for the
Broncos
Chiefs as
fan,
well.
but
Yeah.
I can't stand the Philadelphia teams, mainly because of a lot of Philadelphia fans. I know they're not all that way, and there's some in the chat, but they're I can't. There's just some cities I just can't root for their sports teams, and Philadelphia is one of those.
They're
Just
very abrasive
Yeah.
fan base, no
Yeah.
doubt.
Yeah. So I don't know if they got a better team or not. I have no clue.
It's a lot
I don't watch
deeper. It's a
NFL,
lot
but
deeper than
I
Chiefs.
and their coach drives me nuts. I
Like
just
Sirianni?
he's got a very punchable face.
He does
I
not
know that's
have
not a very
a-
nice thing to say, but he's got a very punchable face. So
Uh,
anyway, that's good. That's how we're ending the show with me saying Nick Sirianni has a punchable face. Okay, whatever. Anyway, that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Thank you all so much for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow. Obviously, well, tonight we have an IB Nation Sports Talk. They'll have Vince and Sean Stiers will have their mailbag. Tomorrow we'll have our show at 1 o'clock. And then, Ryan, you'll have another show that will go live at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Or not live. We'll publish at 8 o'clock tomorrow. I don't think your show's going to be live tomorrow. We'll have that going on tomorrow. So Ryan will have part 2 of his draft show that is now a regular Thursday night feature of Irish Breakdown, or CFB Nation channel. So definitely want to check that out. Make sure you're subscribed to the CFB Nation YouTube page. It won't come up on the podcast app until Friday morning. It'll go up on YouTube on Thursday night. So that's why you need to be subscribed there. So that you'll definitely want to check that out. And of course, Ryan, check out the message board. Sign up, boards.irishbreakdown.com. You will enjoy it. And so we got to run. For Ryan, I'm Brian. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you all for being with us today. Thanks for your patience for our late start, and just for your loyalty and being with us for as long as you guys have been with us. You guys are a great, great group, and we very, very much appreciate you. So, yes, Milton fan, I am skipping your other super chat. $4, also not enough for me to give you my grandpa voice. You can always go back and rewind it, buddy, and listen to it again. Appreciate you, man. Everybody have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you again soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.